G'day, brothers and sisters. This is the other Paul, and this is yet another special interview. All my interviews are special in some way or another. And for this one, I'm interviewing a local Anglican, Sydney Anglican minister and friend, Reverend David Ould. How you going, Rev?
Hey, Paul, very well. Yourself?
Very, very well. That was a bit
I
of a
thought I was
chuckle.
special, and now you're telling me that I'm no more special than anybody else.
When everybody's super, nobody will be.
Exactly that. I was always you, mate.
Everything's special in its own way. Vast majority of my interviews are from people like halfway across the planet, and so this one is actually special. Not to mention, we're in the same communion, so this is relevant to both of us. It's
we know each other.
Absolutely fantastic stuff. And so to kick us off before we get to this absolutely excellent spicy topic, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is David Ould. You can see that spelled below you there. It's a weird spelling. I blame my father for that. I am currently the Senior Associate Minister at St. John's Anglican Cathedral, Parramatta, which is one of the first two original parishes in the colony of New South Wales, as it was then, and actually the longest continual site of Christian worship in Australia. So surrounded by history as I do my job. And effectively my job is to look after the English language congregations at the cathedral. We've also got a number of Chinese and also Farsi, Persian, and then help out the senior minister there in any way I can.
Absolutely legendary. Very, very good and very important role. I wonder how much did it put much weight on you when you saw, oh man, I'm going to be a minister in one of the most significant heritage parishes in all of Australia?
That's an interesting question. I think excitement more than weight. I mean, I do feel a sense of, at times you feel a sense of the privilege of it. I don't think we play to our history. I mean, we like it, we embrace it, we celebrate it. We're going to be celebrating 220 years as a parish at the end of next month, but it's more a privilege to be there, and so one of the things I'm trying to think through often is how do we leverage the place of the cathedral and use that as an excuse to get people in to hear about Jesus and to conversely to speak into our community. So more excitement than anything else, and I get to do many of the things that I enjoy doing in my role. So not much thinking about being daunted. If I stop and think about it now, probably maybe a little bit. There is a responsibility, but that's really my boss's responsibility. He's the senior minister. I'll let him worry about that.
That's it. And yeah, 100%. So it's definitely fun times. Love the people at St. John's. Shout out to St. John's, absolutely legendary place there. And really to jump right into it, you actually suggested. So my original order was going to be just jump right into Australian events, the General Synod, but you actually suggested we begin with a brief history on the beginnings of the Anglican Church, the Anglican Communion itself, and kind of dispel some certain myths and then give some context behind what's happening now. So how would you like to go about with that?
Sure. Well, so in order to really understand where we are today and also why where we are today is such a tragedy, you'll think it's a tragedy anyway when you hear some of the stuff that's going on. It's really important to understand the reformed roots of the Anglican Church. So you actually have to go back 500 years, and you go back to King Henry VIII, he of the famous 6 wives, and lots of sort of basic misinformation spread about the form of Anglicanism. Is it just Roman Catholicism but without a pope? Is it just because King Henry wanted to have another wife? It's probably a little bit more complex than that, as history normally is. So it's certainly true that the Church of England formed in the early 16th century because Henry broke with Rome. But Henry broke with Rome because he was very concerned that he'd actually made a big mistake in marrying Catherine of Aragon. So as your viewers may know, Henry was not meant to be king. His brother Arthur was meant to be king and had indeed been married to this lady called Catherine from Aragon, and that was an important alliance. And marriages, of course, in those days were not least to solidify political alliances, and it put England solidly in step with Aragon, which is in the east of what then became Spain. Obviously, Aragon united with Castile in a personal union a bit later on. So that whole thing had been solidified, and then Arthur the Fool went and died. Which really put things in a bit of a mess. And so everyone turns to Henry and goes, well, mate, there's a marriage that needs to happen here. There's been no progeny from this marriage, and so you now need to marry this girl to solidify the alliance, and we can get on with it, right? So he marries Catherine, and they have a daughter who, of course, is Mary, but no sons. And Henry becomes increasingly convinced that he really should not have been marrying his brother's wife. He's reading bits from Leviticus and elsewhere, and I think you've got to take him at his word that he's quite a pious man in his own way, as these guys would have been. But he's also a king, and he gets to have his own way as well. And so he gets more and more convinced that this is what one person calls the king's great matter. But then, of course, in walks Anne Boleyn. And Boleyn is now the pull as well as the push. And so now Henry is very determined that he is going to drop Catherine and marry Anne. Only there's a little problem. He's a king, and to get a divorce, he's going to have to get the Pope's permission. But, of course, the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor and the House of Aragon are all related. So he goes to the Pope and he says, excuse me, Mr. Pope, can I get a divorce? And the Pope goes, no, you can't. And so this is of great concern to Henry. And what he's actually primarily concerned about at this point is that actually the Pope should be able to have such power in another country. So there is this real sense of, we've got to this existential moment actually in Western European politics and diplomacy, where he's not the only one actually asking this question, right? Now he then goes, right, so what are we going to do here? And he asks his chancellor and the Archbishop of Canterbury to be looking at these things, and they side with the Pope. And so he boots them away, and he gets this young man called Cranmer, Thomas Cranmer, who is at that point just a curate, a lowly curate in the church, but a bit of a learned lawyer type. And he says, right, I want you to put together a legal case and decide whether I actually can divorce this woman or not, according to God's law. So Cranmer goes over to Europe and travels through Europe. Now, you know very well what's happening in Europe at this time, Paul. What's going on?
Something that starts with an uppercase R.
That's right. The Reformation is spreading rapidly. And so as Cranmer goes around and tries to build a biblical and canon law case for the divorce, he is getting more and more influenced by the Protestants that are around him. Not that he hadn't been before. And he comes back and brings back both a case for divorce, but also a renewed conviction about Protestant things. Now, this is where it gets interesting, right? Because Henry has no interest in the Protestant religion. In fact, he wrote a treatise against Martin Luther previously, for which the Pope had actually given him the title Fidei Defensor, the defender of the faith. Ironically, a title still held by the British monarchy today and printed on their coins, despite the fact that, they have officially switched sides. So anyway, so he's got no interest in this, right? But he does want to sort out this whole matter, his great matter. And so he formally breaks the church in England away from Rome, declares that the Pope has no authority there. Of course, you get the famous dissolution of the monasteries as well. Was that a bit of a land and a money grab? Of course it was. Of course it was. He's a king. He just, if you're going to sort out who's in charge, you're going to show who's in charge. And he does begin to do some reformation of a sort in the Church of England. So we do begin to move to some English services rather than Latin. We do begin to establish some articles of religion, although they look very Roman, I've got to say, Paul. They look very, very Roman at first glance. And it's kind of now at this point a waiting game, because Henry is, in his heart, if he's anything, he's Roman in theology, although politically and diplomatically, no way now, right? He declares himself emperor in England, and all that kind of stuff. But they're waiting for his son Edward, who has been raised by a bunch of by a bunch of Protestants. They're just gently biding time and waiting for that. Someone just wrote on the question thing, what does Reverend David, you can just call me David, Bob, that's okay. What does he think of the movie A Man for All Seasons, Sir Thomas More?
If you want to answer, if you want to answer that now, that's cool. But
I think now's the time to answer it before we move away
Sure.
from Henry.
Okay.
And that is, I think that's a brilliant movie. I actually watched it a couple of months ago, actually, again, just to remind myself of it. My favorite scene is the I would give the devil the benefit of the law scene. So Thomas More, I think we've got to agree, Roman Catholic that he is, was a man of great integrity, and he in good conscience just could not advise the and of course he was put in place by Henry to make it happen, but he just couldn't do it, and so they got rid of him. And look, again, Paul, it's not like one side is whiter than white and the other side is evil personified. Well, perhaps a little bit later we're going to see it. But
once that Vatican I comes around.
Love it. If you've not seen that film, you should see it. It's a great film, and particularly that one little scene, I would give the devil the benefit of the law. It's absolutely brilliant. Okay, so Henry dies, right? And his son Edward comes king. Edward comes king around the ages of 11, 12. Strong Aussie accent. That's going to annoy me when he says that. This is not a strong Aussie accent, my friend. This is a British accent tainted, and I use that word in its negative sense, by Australianism. Anyway,
unfortunately, Rev, it's just a fact. The Australian accent is the most purest used by Adam and Eve themselves. I'm sorry.
Well, as I like to say to my friends, you're the ones that have an accent. This is what it sounds like almost without one. Okay, so Henry dies, and his son Edward becomes king. And Edward is 11 or 12, and unlike 11 or 12-year-olds these days, he's already well educated. He knows his mind. He's been prepared to be king, and he's a Protestant. And away we go. But he is sickly. Now, we used to think that Edward was a haemophiliac. That could still have been the case, could be something else. Either way, everyone around him knows that he's not got too long in him. And so they get to work now to reform the Church of England. So the real reformation of the Church of England takes place as soon as Henry is dead and Edward is on the throne. They roll out the first Book of Common Prayer, 1549. That's Cranmer's great work. It's all in English. It's good. It's not perfect. There's a lot of stuff going on still there that's not great.
Whereas the later coming 1662 was the real divinely inspired edition.
Well, I'd actually go 1552, because what happens is the 1549, the reformers on the continent read it, and now, of course, you've got to remember the second generation of the Reformation is happening. It's getting more developed now. They're really thinking things through in Europe, and so guys like Calvin and Bucer has a lot of influence as well in what's going on there. They write back to Cranmer and they go, "This is a great first draft, buddy, but let's do a couple of things, like let's remove the Agnus Dei and the Benedictus from the Lord's Supper service, and let's not have the Lord's Prayer said when the elements are anywhere near the table," and all these kind of really important Reformed Protestant understandings. And so then you get the 1552, which is a cracker of a Protestant prayer book. If you ever want to see a deliciously brilliant Protestant prayer book, it is the 1552. And then in 1553, something awful happens. Do you know what happens in 1553, Paul?
What happens in 1553?
Edward dies.
Sad.
And the next in line is, come on, Mary, otherwise known as Bloody Mary.
Oh, yes,
now,
Bloody Mary.
Mary is the daughter of
stuff happens.
Mary is the daughter of Catherine of Aragon. Okay, and so she is married to Philip of Spain. She marries to Philip of Spain. So we read back into that thing. Spain, of course, is like Catholicism on steroids. And so we have this huge swing back and this massive persecution of Protestants all over England, and the great, Cranmer himself and Latimer and Ridley and others, all executed. Not that some of the Roman Catholics hadn't been being executed before by the Protestants. Not that they're not all people of their time doing things in their own way. But she gets known as Bloody Mary for a reason.
Yeah, but Reverend, when our side does war crimes, it's okay because we're the good guys.
Well, I don't think I would argue that. I think what I'd say is they're all men and women of their time, but Mary was particularly of her time. Maybe we'll put it that way. Anyway, so she only has 5 years, right? Till 58, and then she's dead. We think probably cancer. Again, we don't know. It's a long time ago. Who can tell? But we think probably cancer. And then good Queen Bess, Queen Elizabeth, who is a lovely Protestant girl, comes to the throne, played by an Australian actress. What's her name in the film? I know. Can't remember. Anyway, on we go.
Yeah.
And we now get a re-establishment of the Church of England as Protestant, and Elizabeth has another act of uniformity to get that in place. But it's tempered. It's tempered. So, for example, famously, she says, "I don't want to open a window into men's souls." So she's now looking for a bit of outward uniformity, no one to buck the trend. But she's not going to press it too hard. So, for example, on one of the bits of the act of uniformity, she says, we're going to ask, you get 3 chances. One, if you don't get it right, you get a bit of a rap on the knuckles. Second time, if you don't get it right, we're going to punish you a little bit. Third time, your head's on the block. And then she says to her prosecutors, basically, I don't ever want you to ask the third time. So she's seen what's happened previously, and this is a very English way, and we'll see it again in the next century. She's seen what's all the nonsense and strife that's happened before, and she goes, we're not going to have that now. We're going to unify the country. And so now we get this famous via media, which is really, really important that we understand what that is. And the via media, the middle way that Elizabeth and the divines around her now pursue. Remember, this is a top-down Reformation. It's coming from the authority down, as opposed to the European Reformation, which has come from the bottom up. The via media is the middle way between Luther and Calvin, between Würzburg and Geneva, let's say. It's this final middle way. It's more classically Protestant than Lutheranism really gets to. It's not quite like Calvinism, although it's got lots of flavors of Calvin's Geneva. And I think we sometimes massively understate that. You cannot read the Book of Common Prayer and the 39 Articles and so on and not go, oh, there's a lot of Calvin here, especially when you read through Cranmer's work. That's the via media. The people that now are getting upset are the Puritans, who go, not Protestant enough. Okay, and then the only other thing that you probably need to know then about our history is that then in the 17th century, we'd have another civil war, which is the king against Parliament and Oliver Cromwell and all that kind of stuff. But Cromwell, basically, solid Puritan, the king leaning towards Rome now. And so you get the Civil War. And then after that, when it all settles down and they invite a king to come back in, they then have the final revision of the Book of Common Prayer, the 1662. And it's always worth reading the preface of these prayer books, because that 1662 preface basically goes, and I'm paraphrasing now, we all got a bit upset, didn't we? Let's just everyone calm down, and let's not have too much extreme either way, and we're just going to pursue a good middle way of Protestant theology. So it's a solidly Protestant denomination. I would say even Reformed when you look at the formularies. And then fast forward a couple of centuries, the British go out, just putting flags everywhere all around the world and going, this is now British. And of course, as they go out, they take the Church of England with them. And so you get the Church of England established in a whole bunch of different places, including, of course, Australia. The chaplain on the First Fleet, Richard Johnson, is an ordained Church of England clergyman. His successor, Marsden, of course, is central at St. John's, Parramatta, where you and I are at church. And the Church of England in Australia is established. So I shouldn't use the word established, founded, because established means a particular thing. And then in the 60s, it becomes the Anglican Church of Australia. And it, like many other places in the Western Hemisphere, gets influenced more and more by liberal theology. And so let's now get sort of fairly up to date. The Anglican Communion is this loose, yep.
Just before you do that, we've got a couple of half decent comments here. Everyone is of their time, but some are more of their time than others. Would you agree with that statement?
Everyone is not of their time, but more of their time than others. Yes, I said that about Mary. I don't think we should ever excuse the things that are done.
Yeah, and
certainly the Protestants also executed Roman Catholics. But I think we just, unless we get our head into where they were at, we don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. It's very easy to judge people by our own standards. And again, I'm not excusing it, but I'm saying if you can stop and just understand why people did what they did, you get it. But I think by any account, Mary was another level of that. She was really. They were all very upset at the time. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. Jack Race says she had a bit of cancer suspected in the womb due to her symptoms.
Yes,
so
possibly. Who knows? But yes, that's yeah.
Pure Chopium, fellow Balkan. When our side does war crimes, they're good. Paul, I see you've been nurturing that Balkan mentality.
Well, I can't speak for Paul.
Whoopsie daisies. And yeah, pretty much that. And just before we move on, forgot to do it before we started totally. But my regular live stream shout out to my supporters. Thank you all very much, everyone here who is a supporter. I highly appreciate you helping me make this into a job, side income, which results in higher quality content, more frequent content, and you get some nice little bonuses in the way as well. And if you are considering supporting, you can do so. Link below in the link below to Subscribestar. You get some nice benefits. It's really good, helps me out. And thank you to everyone who is a supporter. And yeah, and so also a reminder with Q&As at the end, super chats and financial supporters of any tier at Subscribestar, you get priority. So yeah, if you want that priority, become one of those. Anyway, let's I reckon we jump forward now. So you wanted to talk about the modern issues now.
Sure. So, like many denominations in the West, the Western Hemisphere, I think maybe we might call it the Anglophone, but it's more than that because there's, it's sort of Western Hemisphere. Liberal theology creeps in again and again and again. We have, a real issue in the 20s and the 30s, but then in the 70s and the 80s, they really get into the seminaries and really start to expand, and so much so that at the Lambeth Conference, which is this invitational conference held every 10 years, the Archbishop of Canterbury basically invites every bishop in the Anglican community together for a bit of a conference. At the 1998 Lambeth Conference, they debate the matter of human sexuality, and they pass the famous Lambeth Resolution 1.10, which basically says no to homosexual activity, and therefore the ordaining of homosexuals and so on. And also, has the standard language about wanting to listen to the experiences and pastorally look after people who are same-sex attracted and so on. And it's a pretty overwhelming vote, to be fair. It's a large majority of these bishops all around. Having said that, there's large numbers coming from America. The Episcopal Church in the United States, as it was then, and now just the Episcopal Church, has huge numbers of bishops, very, very liberal, much of it, and a lot of money. And Trinity Wall Street in particular in New York City owns a whole bunch of downtown Manhattan, right? Generates enormous amounts of money and uses that to help fund the Episcopal Church, and through them some of the Anglican Communion, the Anglican Communion office, and so on. So don't underestimate just the power and the leverage that's there. Anyway, Lambeth 98 happens, and we get this clear, unequivocal statement on human sexuality. It's a pretty basic orthodox statement. The Americans go away and say, well, nuts to that, we'll do what we want to do anyway. And in 2003, they elect the Diocese of New Hampshire in New England elects a man called Vicky Jean Robinson as their new bishop, and he is living openly in a homosexual relationship with another man. At pretty much the same time, the Diocese of New Westminster in Canada also passes a liturgy for same-sex blessings. And it's been rumbling around a number of other places as well, Connecticut and other places, but they're the first ones to cross the threshold, as it were. So now we're at crisis moment, and we have these all these meetings and commissions and panels of reference that get together, and we have this thing called the Windsor Report that ends up being written, and even the primates get together, who are the heads of all the geographical regions. They get together and they sort of agree that that the Americans and the Canadians have got to sit on the timeout step for a bit. And I put it that way because, quite frankly, it's in hindsight it looks that way. But what happens is that none of the institutional authorities in the Anglican Communion have the nuts to implement these decisions, to insist upon them. So the Americans just keep showing up for meetings, right?
Yeah.
Even though they've been told they can't or they shouldn't.
The Americans running everything as usual.
and the Archbishop of Canterbury don't enforce it, and so on. And so we roll inexorably towards 2008, which is the next Lambeth conference. And now there's a whole bunch of Anglican Christians all around the world going, well, hang on a minute, we're not coming. If this matter hasn't been dealt with, and these unrepentant, and of course, if Gene Robinson is there, and so the then Archbishop of Canterbury thinks he can solve it by not inviting Robinson, and to which the Orthodox go, no, and all the guys that consecrated him, because it's their fault as well, right? And he goes, well, let's all get together and talk about it. And they're like, we've been talking about this. For that does no good, does it? Because you don't.
We need more talk and dialogue,
about it. We did make a decision. You didn't implement it, so we're going to meet and talk about it again. So, a whole bunch of these guys get together and say, well, if we're not going to get together at Lambeth, let's get together ourselves. And they get together in Jerusalem in a thing that's called the unfortunately named GAFCON, but there we are, the Global Anglican Future Conference in Jerusalem. 1,000 Anglicans from all around the world getting together, and bishops, clergy, and laity, by invitation, they get together, they issue the Jerusalem Declaration, and this GAFCON movement is formed. They meet again in Nairobi in 2013. I was there. That was quite tremendous. And then again in Jerusalem in 2018, and that was just a marvelous thing with 2,000 of us meeting together.
That really is a flex to meet in Jerusalem of all places.
it certainly is. I mean, the significance of that for many people was quite profound.
Yeah.
And it's a really it is by all accounts a much better organized conference than the Lambeth conference. There's much more clear unity on display because we are actually united. We're not pretending that we all believe the same thing, because we actually all do believe the same thing. And it's a wonderful thing to actually realize that the weight of orthodoxy across the Anglican communion is strong. It's just not strong in the institutions themselves. So the Anglican Communion Office and the Archbishop of Canterbury and all these sorts of things. So that's kind of where we're at. And then in the Anglican Church in Australia, we've been seeing this slow push towards liberalism as well. In some dioceses, we have a quite a good constitutional arrangement where the dioceses are fairly independent, and we come together in a General Synod by consent more than anything else. We're not bound by General Synod, so it can't pass bills and legislation that the individual dioceses won't pass for themselves. But there is a sense of we do come together, and we are a representative body together. And we've had a number of bishops really in their diocese pushing the same-sex agenda as well, appointing ministers in openly same-sex relationships, and also pushing for the liturgies. And then we hit crisis point a few years ago when the Diocese of Wangaratta, which is a tiny little rural diocese in Victoria, like it's 23 ministers or something. It's interesting how much influence they can have because they are a diocese, but it's really not. It's a struggling little rural diocese, because this will bring everyone flooding back, right? They do it. And then the Diocese of Newcastle, which is just to the north of here in Sydney, where the bishop fancies himself as a bit of a mover and shaker in these things. They both pass these bills, and the big one is this bill to allow a same-sex blessing. And you can read the analysis of that liturgy on my website, davidould.net. Did you see what I did there?
Yes, do that. I'll be plugging that. Actually, I wonder if I plugged that already in the. I think I might.
You can do it as many times as you want, my friend. I won't complain. And so I do it. I've done an analysis of that liturgy so that if people want to go and see it, they can see exactly what it is and how it does. Anyway, so we're at a crisis point now, right? So we've moved from this informal, it's kind of happening under the, there you go, thank you. This informal, it's been happening under the radar sort of thing, to formally crossing the Rubicon, as it were, on this matter. So we're all in a tiz. Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen?
Yeah.
And indeed, one of the blessings does happen. And then the primate says, look, can we all just hold off a minute? And he refers these bills to what we call the appellate tribunal. Now, the appellate tribunal is like a big, it's kind of like the Supreme Court of the Supreme Court of the Anglican Church of Australia, but it's really just an opinion offering body. it offers opinions rather than giving rulings, and a little bit loaded towards the liberal side by when the last elections went through in the General Synod. Anyway, basically, this thing gets sent up to the appellate tribunal, and they ask, is it good with the Constitution? And the appellate tribunal comes up with a 5-1 majority decision. And I gotta tell you, it is, now you know why lawyers get paid good money.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember hearing your description of this. It's my word.
By all accounts, so here's what they do. They go. Well, I need to spend a little bit of time explaining it, Paul, because to understand the shenanigans is quite important. The appellate tribunal in the Constitution, if they have a matter of doctrine, theology that they cannot agree on, they cannot decide upon, then because they're lawyers, technically, they're meant to refer that out to two bodies. And the two bodies that they're meant to refer those questions out to are, one, the House of Bishops, and secondly, this body called the Panel of Assessors. I think that's the Board of Assessors, right? They're a board who assess these questions. And so they write these 4 questions. And the questions are kind of loaded. You can see where they're going with it when they write these questions. And they really, what they're trying to do is they're trying to restrict the definition of the word doctrine in the Constitution to make it as narrow as possible to those things absolutely essential for salvation. That's where their questions are going. Well, the House of Bishops write an answer, and it's drafted by one of the key conservative bishops, and that answer goes back. And the Board of Assessors write a very, very long answer to these 4 questions, and both those responses to the panel of reference, to the appellate tribunal, both of them come down very strongly in favor of the orthodox position, and they say no, doctrine is much wider than that, and it's everything, and it certainly must encompass this, and they go to the BCP and show the marriage and all that kind of stuff. They're good, robust orthodox answers to these questions, and the appellate tribunal majority just go, well, we didn't like that, so we'll put that in the bin.
Yeah.
I just find no other way. I find no other way of describing it than that. One of course, the members is Justice Croft, who is a senior judge in Australia, who just happens to be Chancellor of the Diocese of Wangaratta. Now, to the life of me, I cannot understand why he did not recuse himself from the process, but he claims he was able to continue to be fair and objective about it, so we will have to take him at his word. Anyway, so they come back 5-1 and they say there's no problem with this. It's not contrary to the Constitution, because the definition of doctrine in the Constitution is it's very, 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 very narrow, really. Yeah.
And so it's not, and so same-sex blessings are not against the doctrine of the Anglican Church,
not against the Constitution. So they're legal. Yeah. They're legal, and they deliberately go, but we're not making a theological statement because we weren't asked a theological statement. We're a constitutional body, so it's constitutionally okay. So now we're in a bit of a mess, right? Now we're in a complete mess because it is a bit of a farce. And you can see what's going on as you read the ruling. So what happens now is the Conservatives get together and they say, okay, well, how are we going to settle this? Well, the appellate tribunal has regularly in its rulings insisted that the General Synod is the place to decide like these biblical, doctrinal, theological matters. And also that the General Synod actually has ways of making statements. And so the Conservatives go, right, well, let's have 2 statements that we're going to debate and pass as a General Synod. And we'll make a statement. And basically, if those statements pass, then we've got the position of the Anglican Church of Australia is that constitutionally same-sex blessing would be okay, but actually it's not okay because it doesn't pass the doctrinal test. So it fails. So it's a great way of thinking it through. And so the General Synod finally meets after having been delayed by I would say both by COVID and by a bit of kicking the can down the road to avoid what they knew was going to come. General Synod finally meets. Our General Synod is made up of 3 houses: laity and clergy, and then the diocesan bishops from around Australia, and it's about 2/3 Orthodox in both laity and clergy, and it is that because we decide the number of delegates constitutionally according to the number of ordained clergy. So because evangelical gospel ministry naturally grows far more than liberal ministry, it has been growing. So dioceses like Sydney and elsewhere, as they grow relative to the liberals, they get more and more clergy. We get accused of branch stacking and the rest of it, but the reality is those are the rules we agreed on. That's where we're at. So there we are. And so the statements get debated and then voted on. The number one statement is basically, here's what marriage is, and therefore we cannot condone same-sex marriage. That's basically the guts of the statement. And statement number two is, here's what marriage is, and here's what the definition of a chastity is, and we uphold chastity. Statement number one gets voted on, passes almost two-thirds to one-third in laity, over two-thirds to one-third in the clergy, and then it loses by 2 votes in the House of Bishops. And ironically, the statement on chastity is passed by the same margin. So they voted down the definition of marriage and its consequent what you deduce about same-sex marriage from it on the first one, but when you don't mention same-sex marriage, the chastity vote goes up. So what you actually learn there is that it's not about theological consistency, it's actually about this one issue. Absolutely.
And to make it explicit for people, the absurdity is that they rejected the definition of marriage, but they passed the chastity one, which defined marriage in accordance with the Book of Common Prayer, which is
same definition. Same definition. So the only difference was they just refused to give way on this matter, and we're pretty clear now on which bishop voted which way, although it was a private vote. So that's where we're at. We're actually in this moment of crisis. The crisis has been brought about by bishops who are voting against the historical Orthodox faith, the faith handed down once for all to the saints, the way the church has understood this matter for 2,000 years and beyond. And we're now wondering what's going to happen next. And as diocesan synod season starts, we're beginning to see bishops in their presidential addresses go, well, it's possible now, isn't it? So the latest one was just in Gippsland the other day. The bishop in his presidential address effectively opened the door. Now, some of them are coming out and being quite courageous about it, and some of them are being a little bit more sneaky. I think that's the only way of putting it. I'm going, well, I'm just the bishop. You as a synod will have to decide. What you've got to actually say about John Parkes, who was the bishop in Wangaratta at the time when they passed that, is he at least was upfront about what he wanted and the direction he was taking the diocese. So you've got to give him something for that. But that's where we're at now. We wait to see what's going to happen. The House of Bishops itself is quite clearly now utterly divided. Whether they will meet together as a fellowship, who knows? They certainly have a bit of business that needs to be done, and there's pressure on the primate, who is essentially a chair and nothing more. He's the Archbishop of Adelaide. There's a pressure upon him to try and make something work. But time is soon coming when he will have to decide either way, which way he's going to stand, I think, and how we can hold this whole thing together, because these are two irreconcilable positions now. Yeah,
that's it. Pretty nuts times. As Raider here says, Jesuit trickery has infiltrated the Anglicans.
I'm not sure about the Jesuits, and that's not how you spell infiltrated. Apart from that, great statement.
It's true that Jesuit trickery in the form of the whole constitutional thing, where they go technically definition this, definition that.
And the appellate tribunal has done this on a number of occasions, right? So on the matter of women bishops, which got punted to the appellate tribunal to avoid a vote in General Synod, they went, well, the wording in the ordinal, in the consecration of bishops, is kind of vague. I know it says man, but it doesn't really have to be man. It's kind of, at the time they didn't consider it, so it's okay. And then when they offered an opinion around the same time on lay and diaconal administration of the Lord's Supper, they went, oh no, the words are very tight and very, very defined in what they mean. So there's just this, it's farcical, actually. It's a bit silly, but
following all the church politics, both in my own community here and abroad, I'm almost getting the impression that ecclesiastical courts are just more damage than benefit, almost, because we get so many of these cases where it's just they quibble over otherwise universally understood definitions just to get a certain outcome. Like, I don't know how closely have you looked at the recent SBC drama, Southern Baptist Convention?
I've followed it a little bit. I've really just followed the memes about Rick Warren.
So true. So true.
Rick Warren was both Melchizedek's father and mother, as I understand it.
What's just happened recently is big drama about Rick Warren and Saddleback Church, like the biggest church in the SBC. And he was, without calling them pastor, he was functionally ordaining women to pastorship, including his successor, both a man and a woman, but he wasn't calling them pastor, even though the Baptist faith and message explicitly is no women pastors. And so a bunch of people, huge portion of the convention, be like, okay, we need to kick them out because they're flagrantly violating the Baptist faith and message. But then, sure enough, the main like kind of like the equivalent of the court, I guess, in the SBC, what's it called? The credentials committee. That's it. The guys who actually determine whether someone's eligible to be in the SBC if they abide by the Baptist faith and message. Rather than just simply say, yep, Rick Warren's clearly violating this. Let's kick out Saddleback Church. They start a committee on the definition of pastor.
Yeah, that's the way it works. Hey, Paul, while we just bringing a pause here and sort of that's the past. Let's talk about the future. Zeb MacLeod in the comments there has made a really helpful little comment, and he said it's important to mention that conservatism is not just for evangelicals, there are conservative Catholics as well. There's his statement up there, of whom Zeb is one. He's entirely right. The good guys getting together certainly include those we would call them high church Anglo-Catholics. Zeb and I are going to disagree on a bunch of churchmanship, and he and I already know where we disagree, but there is no doubt that those guys are also, when it comes down to it, they're gospel men and women, and certainly
Father Zeb's the Anglo-Catholic here.
He's the one. Call no one father, says Jesus, but that's all right. I'm smiling because I say it in that spirit.
That's right. Call no man father.
he and I know exactly where we disagree, and that's fine. But these are good gospel men and women. They have a slightly different churchmanship, not one I can subscribe to, but they're on the right side of this debate. And I think they ought to be most aggrieved, in one sense, by what's going on, because one of the things you notice about liberalism in these liturgical denominations is that the liberals love the fancy dressing up and liturgical things, and they love that. And I think, and probably Zeb would agree with this, they do it because it's their only mark of authenticity. Because they've rejected authentic theology and doctrine, but they want to claim, we're the proper Anglicans, so look at us, we're dressing up in the fanciest stuff and using the fanciest liturgies, whereas just give me my BCP, which doesn't tell me how I should robe. That's it. But put on a fancy hat. Still love it. Still tolerate you too, Zeb.
Liberal liturgical rather than Catholic. That's a good
exactly that. And it is, isn't it, Zeb? It is for them. It's the mark of authenticity, because they don't have the proper one.
Yeah, that's it.
Put on
Harry Pallett, I really appreciate your work in our diocese, BCW, Zeb. How good. So Zeb, a fellow Aussie, I assume?
He's in Australia. He's been very courageous in what he's done and put a lot of energy into some things. And maybe me praising him is the kiss of death for him there. But that's okay. That's okay. Good on you, Zeb.
How dare you?
All right. So that's where we're at. This is the moment we're at. We're at this almost existential crisis.
Big tipping point. And I remember, I'll right after this, I'm going to ask you about your own personal attendance and account of the synod itself. But I remember seeing a statement by just after the marriage definition failed by our own Archbishop Raphael, and a very profound statement. I don't want to misquote him because I don't have the quote in my head, but basically something saying, look, if we're not going to agree on something as fundamental as this, why meet in the future? If he says something like that.
That certainly was in his speech to the statement. He was the main proposer for the first statement. And certainly when he responded, he intimated that again. And he's absolutely right.
Yeah, exactly.
If we cannot agree on fundamentals, and more so because you can see underneath what's going on, then why are we meeting together?
Yeah, that's it.
And that's a really serious question for us now. Whether we will meet together again as a General Synod, we don't know. I'd like to think we will. Because there are some things to take great encouragement from, which maybe we can talk about as we pivot into this next section. But there are some big things that need to be sorted out too.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're really at the tipping point right now. And you got firsthand experience of that in the General Synod literally just happened as soon as I joined our local Anglican church.
Yeah, yeah, you've
Very
just
interesting
joined.
timing there. Curious
That's right.
timing, isn't it?
That's
And
right.
so you personally went there yourself. You represented our parish to make that
Well,
clear.
no. So
Or
I
rather,
represent
how would you
the diocese. I represent the
diocese?
diocese.
That's it. Diocese, yeah.
So our synod elects its representatives to General Synod.
Yep.
I was there, and also as a lay guy from our parish as well, who was there as well, who's done significant work in the diocese too, and so he was the right kind of guy you want to have there as well. Yeah, and I was one of about 70 delegates from Sydney. It's quite a substantial body.
Yeah, it's epic. That's kind of the advantage of not having an electoral college type system, where we conservatives, we trads can call all the shots, so to speak. But
well, it's been a long time coming, Paul. Can I just say, because it hasn't always been that way. But as orthodoxy has grown, I can't remember where Zeb's trying to say is evangelicalism. And look, the main growth is evangelicalism. Let's be fair. But as orthodoxy has grown, so the relative weights of the houses of laity and clergy have changed as well, and it's certainly going in one direction now. But because the bishops are by diocese, as I said, you've got these small, tiny little rural dioceses where it's still that way. But it's just going to take one or two to shift, and you're back in a position where you've got majorities in all three houses on the key issues. So certainly, possibly, well worth hanging in there for something. The reality is, many of these rural dioceses are close to, if not actually at, bankruptcy.
Wow. Yeah.
So that raises a number of interesting questions about their continued future and how that might be sustained.
100%. And you yourself at this synod, right in the thick of it. Tell us, what was that like? What was key in there to you in terms of outcome?
So actually, look, lots of positive. I want to say lots of positives, right? We can concentrate on this one kind of big monumental event, which kind of wasn't great. But then you've actually got to realize, first of all, that the votes in both laity and clergy were really, really good. So there's much to be thankful for there. One thing that was good for me was some great renewal of relationships. So what's been nice at Synod is there is a generally a genuine attempt by many, not all, but by many, to bridge across the divide, even relationally. So I can think of a couple of key relationships. As one lady in particular, if she's watching, she'll know who she is, who has become very dear to me, actually. And it was lovely to see her again. She's from the other side of the country, and we greatly disagree on things, but we disagree over a meal together, and with a smile. And it was a genuine joy to see her there. Others where I felt constrained in how much friendship I could offer anymore, where they had been primarily responsible for some of these divisive actions. I think John's instruction in his second letter is really, really clear. There comes a point where you cannot sit down to have a meal with someone if they are blatantly. And I think if you're one of the people that has put up one of these bills that so fractured us, then it's hard, isn't it, at that point to maintain? And that's really sad. That's a really sad moment to be at, because you don't want to be in that position, but that's one of the pains of it. But it's very, very interesting. Of course, I am a little bit well known in those circles because of my website and the writing that I do. And one of the things I've done over the last 5-10 years is expose when this stuff happens, which makes a lot of people annoyed, especially some bishops. It's interesting that the people wearing purple shirts who avoid your eyes when they see you. That's always fascinating. So interesting time for me. I had a little side gig going on at the same time for another organization I'm working for that I was working to support and help as well. So some of my energy was spent in that as well. I didn't speak much in the synod simply because I felt probably better to let other people have the voice, but I stood up a couple of times on a couple of things. If you ask me what the defining moment of the synod was, however, I in my final synod report, I actually lay it out on my blog, and it is the moment where Bishop Matt Brain, who's the Bishop of Bendigo, stood up and he put a motion up on the paper, which was basically and I don't mean to be disparaging of it, but it was basically why can't we all just agree to get along kind of a motion. in fraternal love and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the principal of Moore Theological College, Reverend Dr. Mark Thompson, put up an amendment to that. And the amendment was, we'll all get along because we all agree on, and then he listed 3 paragraphs, very simple statements. Now, those 3 paragraphs are what we call the fundamental declarations in the Constitution of the Anglican Church of Australia. So by our own definition, this is who we are as Australian Anglicans. And so Mark says, here's the amendment. Let's add this to it, and let's say this is why we all get along together and why we agree, because while we may disagree on peripheral things, we agree on this core central stuff. This is our defining, it's constitutionally what defines us, right? The fundamental declarations, look them up if you're watching. And that amendment got up, and then all hell breaks loose because, oh, how dare we be so narrow and definitional. So what you've got is, and I described it in my piece as the Anglicans who refuse to be Anglican.
Yeah, honestly.
So what we got time and time again at General Synod was Anglicans who refuse to be Anglican. When you asked them to define themselves by our self-definitions of Anglicanism, which of course are thoroughly orthodox, no, they don't like it, and time again. And that for me was actually the crystallizing moment on that last day. And there's a fuller report on my blog of that last day. But that for me, I think, is the defining thing.
I actually in a stream a couple or 3 weeks ago or so, I actually covered the synod, that specific point as well, the absolute madness of it, and I actually used your blog for that, so that was very helpful.
And so I think that's and that ought to be clarifying, you see, because again, we go back to this conversation we had a little bit a while ago about people wanting to be authentically Anglican and the rest of it. When we say, all right, well, put your money where your mouth is, just agree to the things that we all constitutionally agree to, no, they can't do it. In the General Synod in Melbourne back in 2010, I think it was, I sat in a discussion group with Bishop Brain's predecessor, the Bishop Andrew Curnow, as he was at the time. And Bishop Curnow had written a report on the future of the Anglican Church of Australia. It was devoid of any clarity on theological unity. It was all about, structural stuff and whatever. And as the conversation progressed over the week, they didn't try those discussion groups again in a hurry. They got to a moment where he turned to me and he said, why are you always causing a stink? And I said, I'll cause a stink while guys like you who are in charge refuse to uphold our constitutional, so do you stand by the 39 articles, Bishop? Do you stand by the doctrine of the Book of Common Prayer? And he went, I don't want to talk about that. And I say that to you on this thing. I'm happy to say it in public because that was the conversation we had, and it was
that's unbelievable.
That's the defining moments, you see. And so what we've got is we just need to be really, really clear. We have got bishops who don't believe what they say when they get consecrated. They actually don't really believe it.
That's pretty shocking.
So in the BCP, it's, do you unfeignedly believe? Will you chase away strange doctrine? All that kind of stuff. And they just don't believe it. They say they do. They'll say it to get the purple shirt and the prestige and whatever else it is, but they don't genuinely believe it. And they replace it instead with this quasi Christianity, this your viewers know all the shtick. It's got a particular Anglican flavor to it in our scene. But that's where we're at. That's where we're at.
That's, oh my word. It's almost a comedy seeing self-proclaimed Anglicans and then say, oh, by the way, anyone's an Anglican. Like these definitional things. Yeah, no, that's not mandatory. The shockingness of how close that, because if I'm not mistaken, it was initially I'm trying to remember. It was the initial motion that was put forward that wanted to affirm and make sure that Anglicans are united constitutionally, and then there was an amendment to get rid of that, or was it the other way around?
Other way around. So it was why can't we all get along and play together nicely? Yep. And again, I'm not trying to disparage it when I say that. And then someone said, well,
that is what it is.
if we're going to get along, let's define what the core things we agree on.
Yep.
Let's just remind ourselves of what they are and affirm those things. Let's affirm them because we agree on them, right? Turns out, no, that was upsets us all.
But if I'm not mistaken, the amendment to make it like, let's actually be united on this stuff, that passed, but only
That
Only
passed, because it passed it's a straight up and down vote in the whole of General Synod. You don't go to houses unless someone particularly calls it in houses. But after that, we had one of these things. It's called move that the motion not be put. It's like let's not vote on this final one. So you don't actually get a yes or no vote at the end. Everyone just goes, "Oh no, this is all terrible. Let's stop it here." Yeah.
That's
It's staggering, isn't it? It's staggering.
It's actually amazing. Oh, Jeff, good to see you. He talks proper Queen's English. I assume he's not Australian originally.
Well, it has been tainted. Every time I go back to the UK, every time I go back to the UK, I heard you. I'm just ignoring you. Every time I go back to the UK, I do get laughed at.
Yes, of course. I mean, it is. What was that church father who said there will be a time when the madmen look at the one sane person and say, "He is mad, for he is not like us." That's you going to the UK with your more purified.
It is a little bit, and then I come back here and I'm not like us anyway. So you know, I'm a stranger in a strange land wherever I go.
You're almost there. One day you'll be the full way.
on Thursday, I'm making my vow, my promises, and becoming officially Australian. Yeah.
Nice. Let's go.
Nice. Apples.
Nice, Gary. Let's go. Right. He's becoming one of us. Anyway, so we got a history lesson, quite an excellent crash course history lesson in the origins of Anglicanism, the recent liberal scourge, the synod, and just general conditions in Australia. Now for the main question itself, in light of all this stuff, all this dumpster fire happening around us in Australia, what do you see as the trajectory of Australian Anglicanism?
Don't know. Great show, Paul. Thanks, mate.
All right, thanks. See you later. Have a good one.
Well, really comes down to a number of things. GAFCON Australasia, which is not just Australia, but the surrounding area, is meeting in Canberra in August. I think it'll be interesting to hear, get some more clarity there. By that time, I think some of the conversations that have happened amongst the bishops may have progressed a little bit. Certainly what GAFCON has done is effectively set up an extra provincial diocese, or the structure for it, so that if you have parishes in dioceses where the bishop goes ahead and approves of heretical stuff, basically, then there'll be a new home available for them. That certainly is being set up, and it could be, if things just go completely awry in Australia, that you see a bishop consecrated for that diocese, or a retired bishop, or maybe an assistant bishop somewhere take over that role. That could happen, but that will only be required if parishes feel the need to break away from their diocese, because they can no longer sit under the oversight of a bishop who's endorsed falsehood. But there's a number of things that need to happen before then. The bishops need to sort themselves out. It could be that some dioceses will now push ahead with same-sex blessings. And so you could see some pro forma disciplinary matters brought against a bishop who approves of those things and allows them to happen. So that's a possibility, that we might test that in under our Episcopal standards canons. And that'll be, I mean, I wrote a piece a while ago saying that these disciplinary moments are helpful either way. Either you get the result which you should get, which is that, you should discipline a bishop for approving of things that are that are not orthodox, or the whole thing will fall over, which itself is a clarifying moment anyway. Much of it will come down to the Archbishop of Adelaide, who's the primate, and how firm he wants to be. He chaired the General Synod really well. It has to be said, he chaired the General Synod really, really well. Really got conversation going, was firm where he needed to be. I don't think any party at that General Synod could claim that they were unfairly treated by him. In fact, quite the opposite. He did a remarkable job of chairing what was always going to be a difficult moment. However, he's a bishop like other bishops, and at some point he needs to pick a side, and be very, very clear in the extent that he can be. He just can't be referee forever. He needs to call these bishops in a certain direction. I suspect he won't. I suspect he'll want to still be chair. And that will not satisfy the Conservatives at some point. They'll go, well, look, we can't meet in any formal fellowship capacity now with these guys. And so that may lead to a bit of a fracturing. I suspect, because we're Anglicans and we don't tend to overreact, we will see another General Synod. I suspect we will see one. But it may be under some very strained relationships at that point. If this wasn't the last one, I suspect the next one probably will be. But we'll see.
Assuming an act of God doesn't happen and the minds of heretics are changed like that.
Well, repentance would be remarkable, wouldn't it? But
it'd be fantastic.
We'll see.
Now, Father Zeb has some pushback. He says, I honestly believe GAFCON is not the answer for this situation. Really need to focus on keeping within the church. Schism will only lead to further schisms, seeing we could end up with a situation in the States with a ridiculous
So can I respond to that? Because the great thing about GAFCON is to say GAFCON is not about leaving. GAFCON is about staying within the Anglican Church of Australia, but staying within a structure where people can be satisfied that their lines of responsibility and accountability, which we're very clear on, like I have bishop and so on, that those are good, clear lines. So I have no desire to leave the Anglican Church of Australia at all. And my suspicion is that if you get parishes breaking away from the diocese, one of the reasons they will go to a GAFCON diocese with a bishop who's ordained in the Anglican Church of Australia, so either a currently ordained consecrated bishop or one that's consecrated by Australian bishops, which is what will happen, is because they want to remain within the Anglican Church of Australia. They want to remain faithfully as Anglicans in Australia. So we're not breaking away. When GAFCON meets again in Kigali next year in Rwanda, nobody there is leaving the Anglican Communion. But what we're saying is we are no longer going to meet with those in the Anglican Communion who are pursuing this false teaching. And so that's going to be worked out in a smaller scale in Australia itself. So it's not schismatic. And if anybody is being schismatic, please, it must be those who are choosing a path away from orthodoxy. They're the ones who are breaking away from us. We just want to stay as the Anglican Church of Australia, but it may be we need to restructure ourselves within that in order to be faithful to the Lord Jesus Christ as he reveals himself in the scriptures. Yeah,
I agree with that. And I personally, I don't have as much of so probably even further than you'd go, I don't have as much of a issue with quote unquote schism. So contra many more of my, otherwise I have some high church leanings, but this is one of them where I'm like, look, if there's a body that is, if hypothetically, if it came to the place where a body was so manifestly corrupted and let's just straight up say apostate, what else do you do? Like what? Schism itself, unity. The problem I have with so many very high church conceptions is the idea of unity for unity's sake. Like that is just it, and it's not. And some of them give that impression. I know they'll say obviously it has to be in truth, but with the extent to which they require unity in how many situations they require, it almost comes across as at least that just maintain unity for unity's sake, and splitting off is a bad thing, which
it can be. It can look that way. I'm sure Zeb would argue against it, but what we probably would want to recognize is it's a higher view of the visible church than perhaps we might hold to. And everyone's got their point. But I think to answer the more general charge, no, we're not leaving. We're not leaving, but we simply cannot meet in fellowship, and I use that word deliberately, fellowship anymore with some people, which is why, I mean, Zeb in his comments mentions what's going on in New Zealand, but again, the same thing is going on there, right? So you've formed a new diocese, but you've deliberately gone to Anglican bishops within the Anglican Communion and said, we want to remain Anglicans. We just cannot remain in fellowship with this apostate body.
Yeah, that's it.
Like, what's the alternative? I mean, I want to go, what is the alternative?
Yeah.
Like, if we're Anglicans, we believe in our polity, which is this threefold order. I mean, we can debate whether we should be having bishops in the way that we have them. But again, this comes down to the consistency argument and integrity. If you think that's what you should be having, then how do you do that when your bishop's gone rogue? Yeah. And the councils of Nicaea are pretty clear, aren't they? Aren't they clear? you get a new bishop.
There you go. And I like how you mentioned that
What
yourself.
a patristic argument. There it is.
Yeah,
there
exactly. And you brought up such a key and, in my opinion, oft ignored, if not almost universally ignored. Like in my engagement, for example, I engage a lot with dialogue and apologetics with Romanists and Eastern Orthodox and that. And they almost universally neglect in their apologetics, as well as even with certain Anglo-Catholics, not to throw anything at Father Zeb specifically, but they'll almost always ignore the biblical definition of schism as the one who's bringing in the false teaching is the one doing the schism, not necessarily the one materially breaking off from a body. So very often the high church, the high church traditions will say, if you materially break off from the body, you're the one committing schism, even though you are actually maintaining the truth and the body you're breaking off from is horribly corrupt. Whereas no, as you said, it's the opposite. It's the ones who bring in the false doctrine who are causing the schism ultimately.
We're actually recognizing that they've walked away. And then every 5 years ago, someone discovers the Donatists and thinks that that's what's going on here as well, which is obviously, isn't it? Because the key thing about the Donatists and the Donatist controversy, just in a nutshell for your viewers, is, and we're 5th century now, if I'm right, is that after a big wave of persecution, there were a bunch of people who renounced the faith, but then after the wave of persecution was over, came back and said, actually, no, we were weak, we succumbed, and we want back in. And the Donatists said, no, once you're done, you're done. And of course, the Donatists were wrong, because repentance is the key, isn't it? So GAFCON is not a Donatist organization, because, as we've just mentioned a moment ago, we actually long for repentance. We long for those who have walked away to come back. And let's just be really, really clear. If Donatism is gonna win, then Cranmer himself is out, because Cranmer famously recanted while he was in the Tower, but then on his execution day, of course, came back strong and hard. Denounced the Pope. And when he went to be let out to be burned, said, "Let this hand be burnt first, the hand with which I signed my recantation." So, no, he's a classic example of someone who succumbed under persecution and then came good at the end. So that's what we're looking for here. We're actually looking for those who have walked away from the truth to come back. So to throw the Donatism card is a bit nonsensical as well. Just betrays.
That's how I like to. That's how the concept of schism should truly be framed, and to bring it back beyond the before the Donatist comment you made. Not that some language I'm personally starting to adopt now is not that if I was to materially break off from a highly corrupt body, I'm not breaking off from them. They're breaking off from me, but more importantly, they're breaking off from the body of Christ.
Well, that's the most fundamentally important thing, isn't it? They're the ones that have walked away from Jesus.
That's it.
So anyway, that's the long answer to your question. The short answer is still dunno.
It really depends on it really depends on outcomes. We can look through multiple timelines, I guess. So this timeline you commented on, I guess, was like GAFCON doing some cool stuff and like maybe some happy endings and all that happened.
GAFCON had this 2020 I forget what it's called thing where they've gone, we're ready in case something happens. We're ready to look after people. And it's clear to us now that these guys don't give up. And in every other province where this has been pushed ahead, we see that these guys don't give up. For them, it's actually the gospel. Their gospel is a gospel of inclusion. It's just everyone's in, and so that's their view of what the gospel is. So for them, this is gospel faithfulness. So there's a one sense which you don't expect them to give up. So we've just got to be ready to look after those people who want to stay faithful to the Jesus of the Scriptures, because I don't know any other.
That's it. Jack Ray, time to drive some jerks out of the temple. I agree. Let's do it, boys.
Time to let them pay for everything themselves, maybe.
That'd be nice. Oh, man. And it's the Luther schismed argument. Yeah, so true. So true. No. The Bishop of Rome schismed from Luther. That's the fact. That's an actual fact.
Yeah.
And Jack Ray says, GAFCON, ?
Global Anglican Future Conference. For a while, they tried to run with the FCA, the Fellowship of Confessing Anglicans, because they realized that GAFCON maybe had some connotations. And it was like, gaff, really? That is a gaff. But we've all got used to it now. It's stuck. It is what it is. And that's the name.
That's it. And probably the last thing in interaction with Father Zeb before we move on. There should always be an option for mercy for sure, but certainly if people who hold Orthodox faith will leave, we'll see a quicker and further descent of the church.
We're not leaving, Zeb. We're not leaving. They've left. We're not going anywhere. We're just restructuring how we're looking after people within the Anglican Church.
He to be fair, he might have been responding to me because I'm more overtly like.
But there is look. What he does raise is there are these little pockets of magnificent orthodoxy within these horrible dioceses, right?
Yeah.
And you got to hear his concern for giving up that position. Mm-hmm. You've got to hear that. And so I suspect Zeb will go, that's what's going on there. And look, that can I just say, I think, Paul, it is a wisdom issue, right? It is not. This is not a moral thing, right? This is a wisdom about the best way to go forward, and everyone's going to have their different lines somewhere else, which is flavored by local circumstance and the particularities of that, and their ecclesiology and all those kinds of things. So we can knock around the different options that are available, but I think we've got to recognize that those that stay in good conscience.
Yes.
But there may be a day when they can't. But that's what's
and that's why I kind of say, like, I kind of ask what Father Zeb means by those who are Orthodox in faith leave. They see a quicker descent of the church. Well, what do they mean? If by the church he means the spiritual universal church, I'd say, well, no, it's the exact opposite. It's the preservation of that church by leaving a corrupt body. But
Paul, let me finish your sentence. If he means the diocese they're in, I'll go. It's gone anyway, my friend.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Yeah, like, and even if one can see the remote possibility of staying within the communion, and then the remote possibility of reforming it. The other question we've got to ask, which again, very, very little emphasis by more high church thinkers I see, is what about the sake of the local congregation? Because all the discussion, all the emphasis is almost universally, ironically, on the universal church. What's the sake of the universal body, the concern of the unity, the material unity of the universal body, but very little comparatively discussion on what is necessary for the local congregation, which materially is the most fundamental expression of the church, the local gathering and body of believers. If you could technically stay within communion and reform a body, that's nice, but what effect will that have on your local congregation to stay within an otherwise presently corrupt body? That's got to be considered.
So all these factors, Paul, which makes me come back to go, let's not be legalistic about it. Let's appreciate there are individual circumstances, and it requires great wisdom.
Yeah, that's it. But I think we can nonetheless see that there's principled agreement, I think, between us and more Anglo-Catholic types and such, but different emphases, I guess, different emphases. My personal emphasis is, like, I'm almost congregationalist in my ecclesiology. I'm very much like, look, local congregation, they do their thing. The larger body decides to say, yeah, no, we're going to do this bad thing. The local bishops say, yeah, no, see you later, goodbye. But that's just me right now. I'm kind of a crypto Baptist, if you will.
we tolerate you too.
Why, thank you very much.
I am the via media between you and Zeb, maybe. That's what it is.
The bright side is that when I first joined our Anglican Church, I did a stream where I reacted to the 39 articles, see how much I agree with, and I think it was like 96% agreement. That 4% wasn't technical stuff. It was something as significant of, let's say, for example, I like my Zwingli on the Eucharist. I'll say that. you probably won't appreciate that. I'm not sure, but
look, I like a lot of Zwingli. I think his argument on this is my body, I think, is the most compelling one that I've heard. But there is something about feasting on Christ in our hearts by faith and with thanksgiving that Cranmer gets to after Calvin. And if you're going to be reformed, you've got to have a bit of Calvin in you, right? That I think I'm more and more convinced by. So, but what is interesting is we've got time for these digressions, don't we, Paul? If you go to the prayer of consecration in the 1662, it is you'd think it's a thoroughly Zwinglian. It's full of the memory language. You think it's a thoroughly Zwinglian prayer. It's just that some of the shape around it is probably a broader Calvinistic Cranmerian. But I think it is interesting that at that moment of the prayer, that Cranmer introduces that most Zwinglian of language. That's interesting. However, you can't read that absent of his own homily and works on the doctrine of the Lord's Supper, where it becomes quite clear that real presence, as he describes it, is his theology. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And that's where I'll point to some of the flaws of fellow memorialists, where they'll say, oh, look, Augustine says the Eucharist is memorial, therefore, and they say it's a sign, therefore it's just that. And then, oh no, let's look at these statements elsewhere, because real presence aren't saying we're eating Christ and we're not remembering his sacrifice. That's not what real presence people say.
Yeah. So I think the key is that language of feast on him in your heart by faith,
yes,
and with thanksgiving. So there's a lovely crude thing in I think it's in the homilies where they go. So that's why if you run out of bread, you're okay. And of course, crudely, one of the arguments is, look, I can't remember it's in the homilies or it's in one of the debates around the Lord's Supper that happens in the 16th century. But crudely, the Protestant goes in one. The bread itself goes in one end and comes out the other. It's passed through, but Christ is fed on in the heart. Which is really interesting. If you go to the BCP 1662 and go to the visitation of the sick, and you do the Lord's Supper with the sick, it goes, look, it could be you just don't have enough bread. And this is the rubric at the end, and that's okay, because remember, it's Christ that's being fed on in the heart, not. So we, interestingly enough, and not to get into the debate, but when the COVID rules first kicked in, on that first Sunday, when COVID started to spread through New South Wales back in those 2 years ago now.
When the government got their first taste of absolute power.
we actually were sharing the Lord's Supper that day, and we made the choice that Sunday that we wouldn't distribute the elements. Because if you remember way back then, we weren't sure about what was safe and what wasn't safe, and we made that choice on the basis of that rubric and the underlying theology that we're feasting on Christ in our hearts. So we explained it to the congregation. We said, this is the approach that we're taking. This is why. This is actually a good moment for us to think through what is happening. We would obviously much prefer to actually have the physical elements there, the bread and the wine, but we will not feast any the less because of it. And it was actually a great teaching moment that we had then. But I think we may have digressed a little bit from
very strong digression. Very strong digression.
This is just how we think through this.
That's it. That's how good this is. And Father Zeb randomly brings up read tract 90 by John Henry Newman. And,
you can do, and I know that Newman had the integrity to go to Rome because he recognized it was simply incompatible.
And I bring this up because let's say John
he's
Henry
Newman. He's still going, Paul.
Newman's a bit of a meme on this channel. He's a bit of a meme because I made a meme video a long time ago. You know the flex tape ads, like hi, Phil Vischerhoof, and I made that, but it's called, instead I called it slap some Newman on it, and that's a phrase I got from a man here, Jeff, a guy for Jesus, because Romanists will often you'll point to them in history, say, hey, church fathers disagree with this, consensus was against your position, and then they'll say, but Newman, development, it developed, it's okay, it developed, it's cool, it's legit. And so I made this whole meme vid of just slap some Newman on it, and so the name Newman will be over the flex tape, and there'll be a big jar of water that says the consensus of the consensus of the fathers disagreeing with Rome, and it's just leaking out, and the guy just slaps the Newman on it, fixes the seal. It's all good.
All good. It's interesting. You probably noticed that the St. John's building that you're in, which was built in the around 1850, is a rebuild of the original building. The original building was a very standard Protestant meeting house, as the early church buildings in Australia.
I think I remember that, yes.
The 1850s building that we're currently in is very clearly a Tractarian building. You walk in, the table is the your eyes all the way down, pulpit set off to the side, although it is a thrust pulpit. It's clearly as the Oxford
church facing the east. I know.
Well, I mean that's standard. That's standard practice, right? But the architecture of the building is clearly Tractarian. I think I'm right in saying that when it became safe for the middle class to come out, they came out to Australia. once all you filthy working class people have done all the hard work that needs to be
Oh,
done.
yes, you filthy as well, by the way.
And we came out and civilized the place. But they were coming out in the 30s and 40s, and they were bringing with them the Oxford movement and the Tractarianism that was growing at that time from England. So it's the building is that we're in today is very reflective of that.
Very beautiful building indeed as well.
And we don't want to diss that heritage. It's part of our heritage.
100%. And so, in light of all those digressions, very many digressions, to bring back to the center of this all, in light of everything that's happening in the very uncertain future, really, that we have, what should faithful Anglicans be? What's the course of action now for faithful Anglicans in Australia today? Both for those here in the absolute epic safe havens of Sydney, but also those in very heretical, compromised, even apostate dioceses. What's your advice for these Anglicans?
I want to say hold the line, and I mean that in a both a positive and maybe a slightly combative sense. So positively, don't lose sight of the main game. The Lord Jesus Christ builds his church; the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And so we ought to be confident that Jesus will do what he wants in his church. And so hold the line in that sense. Just keep doing gospel work, being concentrate on that. And one of the great temptations of a movement like GAFCON is we can become too quickly inadvertently defined by the conflict rather than being what we need to be, which is an encouragement to one another to carry on in gospel work. So hold the line on the gospel. Just keep doing it. That's easy for me to say in one of the major churches in Sydney where we're really under no pressure at all from this. Much more difficult if you're in one of these little churches trying to be faithful, where your bishop has just gone off the rails. So hold the line. Remember that your main job is to present the Lord Jesus Christ to people that they might love and trust and follow him, and be snatched from the fire. But I also want to say hold the line. So the same New Testament, which holds out for us these basics, also does call us to be very, very clear. So we've also mentioned we already mentioned 2 John and the need not to fellowship. We've been doing a sermon series at church, as you know, Paul, we call it Love, Sex, Marriage, and Everything Else. We're spending 5 weeks talking about these things because it's time to, and it's been a really fruitful 4 weeks so far. But on Sunday, we're going to spend a little bit of time in Jude. And Jude's argument is basically, let me paraphrase again the first couple of verses. I would love just to talk to you about the gospel, but these guys. And these guys, the false teaching clearly centers around sexual immorality. So I want to say, recognize that this is important. There's something critical about gender and sex, because it's integral into who we are as human beings, and who we are as human beings is actually integral into the creation. So the binary nature of humanity is the last of the 7 binaries in Genesis 1. However you're reading Genesis 1, it's still core. It's interesting that in Romans 1, when Paul wants to go to the exemplar of sinful humanity rebelling against the Creator and distorting the creation, he goes to sexual immorality and the loss of that male-female particularity in creation. So it's a fundamentally important issue. It destroys churches. It leads people to hell. So do please, I want to say, we are going to have to hold the line, which for some people is going to be a very, very hard choice. So guys, in my position, our job is to make sure that we are doing everything we can to support those people, so that when they get to the moment where in their wisdom given to them by the Spirit, they go, that's it. We've crossed the line here. We can't, go over, and we're going to need to rearrange how we are, that we do everything we can to support them. And so as we realign the Anglican Church in Australia within the Anglican Church in Australia, Zeb, that we're all doing our part in that. And that's why possibly I think the August conference of GAFCON Australasia is going to be so important as an encouragement and as a kind of just a rejig on that. But we need to be praying for our bishops as they meet together in whatever form they meet together, for courage and for wisdom in that. We should pray for our primate. It is an impossible job he's got. But we should pray for wisdom for him, that he does it, he executes it in the right way. Keep praying for repentance. I think most of all, we ought to be praying for and supporting and sending words of encouragement to those ministers and those churches in these dioceses where they're feeling really under the pump. They're feeling really under the pump right now. And some of them are, and I know they are because they sending messages to me after General Synod going, so am I now out of communion with my bishop? Is that where I'm at now? What do I do? And it's tough for them. We got to be there for them. Yeah.
Amen to that. Amen to that. That's why I'm happy we have such a central bastion of orthodoxy, like with the Sydney Archdiocese. So even if someone, whether if they have the strength to continue on in a very combative area, they are glory to that. But then if they see I'm not able to bear this just for my own sake, we have Sydney. Just come to Sydney. Just move to Sydney. That's not hard at all.
Well, I want to say move to Sydney. I'd say, well, let me say a couple of things to you there, Paul. One, we're not perfect. But secondly, it's not just Sydney. And I think this is the thing we need to keep saying. Our opponents keep wanting going, the Sydney motion, the Sydney statement, the Sydney strategy. It's not just Sydney. It's there are Orthodox all over Australia, all meeting together. Sydney may be the largest bit of that, but we don't define it. One of the wonderful things at General Synod was the real unity between the Orthodox from across Australia, and despite some of our disagreements, some of which are quite important, despite that, a real gospel unity. This is not a Sydney, an only Sydney thing. The chairman of GAFCON Australia is the Bishop of Tasmania, and so on. And we actually want to be saying, how do we support you staying faithful where you are? What's that going to look like? And that will be maybe oversight. It might mean some other financial structures have to be put in place. We need to work out what those are, to look after people as well, because you need to pay the bills and provide for people and take some of those anxieties away. So all these different things we need to think through, and we just need to pray. We need to pray for the Anglican Church of Australia, because we're at this pivot moment, and it doesn't need to go where New Zealand has gone, where America's gone, where Canada's gone, where the Church of England is undoubtedly going, where Scotland and Wales have already gone. It doesn't need to go there. Our constitutional structure, the way the General Synod is formed, means that we don't have to go that way, and we may very well not go, but it's going to be messy in the meantime.
Absolutely. Australia, and who knows, Australia could end up becoming the new Jerusalem. This could be where the Lord himself returns and establishes his worldwide kingdom after the millennium. I don't know. You post.
I think Zeb and I both are crazy. I think you're crazy now.
Oh dear. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's excellent. That's excellent advice. It's absolutely necessary. And it's really within the Anglican spirit to resist the threats of authorities who are nonetheless going against the truth. I like to think the way I always like to think of it, because I did a big personal study and actually a mini documentary. People can check it out on the channel on the Court of Desmond controversy, late 2nd century. And I like to think of Protestants particularly, but also Anglicans in these particular circumstances, as channeling the spirit of Polycrates. He received threats from the See of Rome because he refused to go away from the form of liturgy for Pascha, which was, according to them, passed down by John. And Rome said, no, you must celebrate it on this day. You can't do it on the 14th because we say so, or at least the Worldwide Church says so. And Polycrates says, look, our ancestors, John himself, Philip the Evangelist, they followed this tradition. And my own family of bishops, they follow this tradition. All these other major figures in Asia Minor, we follow this tradition. I follow it now, being 65 years in the Lord, and I'm not going to take these threats when other greater men than I said we must serve God rather than men, citing Acts 5:29. And that's really the key statement, the key, in my opinion, the key going away message for faithful Anglicans who are nonetheless struggling under the boot of a heretical authority, that we must serve God rather than men.
And remember, he didn't have an appellate tribunal telling me it was wrong either. So
okay.
What was he going to do?
Yeah, that's it.
Now the appellate tribunal comes along, and it's all up to play now.
Oh yeah, that's it. The solar appellate tribunal. Yes, that's how our faith works. It works. Solar opinion of the court. That's how it works. Absolutely. But yeah, legit, channeling that spirit of resistance to material, mortal authorities in order to keep in line with the highest authority of the universe. That's ultimately the lesson we can all take from this. That's the spirit of the Anglicans, keeping in community, following and submitting to authority insofar as it is in line with the authority of God. That's the key.
And that's really important, right? Because the promise in the ordinal is, I will obey every godly admonition of my bishop.
Godly. Yeah.
Every godly admonition of my bishop. So I want to have, I want to have a situation where I can be as obedient as I possibly can be. But I can imagine there's ministers now all around Australia who are saying to their bishop, look, I don't want to have a fight with you, but here's the thing. I need you to understand that if you insist upon a pastoral visit to church on Sunday, we are not going to have you preach or preside at the Lord's Supper, because we think, but I'm telling you in private now because I don't want to embarrass you by having that, so you can see a lot of that kind of stuff happening as well, where people, are not unnecessarily picking a fight, but at the same time there may be some stern words to be had with bishops as well. And Australia's an interesting place, right? Because we are anti-authoritarian. So you do kind of see, as you can imagine in the stuff that I do tend to see some correspondence between third parties. And some of it is, can I just say, respectful but robust with some bishops. So it's just working out all those different things. Yeah.
100%. That was some excellent wisdom. And this was excellent interview all around. I seriously can't thank you enough for it. This is some excellent stuff, and I really hope Anglicans generally watching, but particularly Australian Anglicans, I hope you got some excellent wisdom from this, some excellent insight into the state of Anglicanism in general, but also especially in Australia. And I'm actually quite excited. You mentioned that GAFCON conference in August, is it, in Canberra?
Yep.
I'm probably gonna if I can get money in transfer, I'll probably head to that. That's
GAFCON Australasia.
Yes.
So even if you look at GAFCON Australia, you'll see the links to the conference. I'm not sure if tickets are still on sale. I don't know. I got mine a long time ago, as you can imagine, Paul.
Fair enough.
But yeah, by all means.
Absolutely. And ladies and gentlemen, we now transition into our Q&A. So as I said at the very beginning, super chats and supporters, they have priority with questions, and I particularly recommend being a financial supporter for Q&As, because super chat, you send one super chat and you get one priority with that. And even with that, YouTube takes like over 30% of that away. So like borderline theft, basically. Whereas with financial supporters, you can support me for as little as $4.50 US a month. And every question in every live stream you gets priority within reason. If you start spamming, I'm going to have to skip ahead of you. Sorry about that. But yes, better value. It's excellent. Either way, super chat, financial supporter, you get priority. And I will look at now, because I have a special channel in my Discord server for financial supporters to send their questions, so I can differentiate it from the rest. And our first one we're going to look at is from a Diakonos supporter, Elderidge, where he says, and you probably do like the supporter tier names, I reckon.
I saw them. I do like them. Yes.
They work pretty darn well, I'd say. And I'll post this comment here myself because it's on the Discord, and then I'll highlight it for us to read. And so once it's up, he asks, what is the Anglican understanding of the apostolic succession that Anglican clergy has, and does that influence over decision-making, like over doctrines and interpretation in the church?
Right. So you're asking me now, not Zeb. And we're probably going to disagree on this slightly. So I would say, and I think I'm right in saying that this is the way that it gets described, especially by Bishop John Jewell in his apology for the Church of England in the late 16th century. The apostolic succession is the succession of faithful ministry, the passing on of the gospel from the apostles. So we don't insist upon that physical passing on, right? But that is symbolic of what Paul speaks about in 2 Timothy 2:2, right? Those things you learn from faithful men, entrust to others. So that physical laying on of hands at consecration, and actually, dare I say it, actually at ordination as well, because when we ordain a new presbyter or priest, all the presbyters in the room come in and lay hands on as well, right? that's symbolic of what's actually being passed on, which is the succession of the truth, of the apostolic truth.
Yep.
So I would go, it's the apostolic truth symbolized by the physical touch. How's that?
Excellent. Yeah, that's how I'd personally understand it as well.
How does it influence decision making? Well, we don't have a magisterium.
Let's go. Me and my Bible under a tree. Let's go. No.
Yeah, just all on our own. No, we read the Bible in community, all that kind of stuff, yada yada. So, in one sense, you kind of do you want to rehearse all the arguments people already know? Let's not do that. Let's push on.
I mean, if you want to bring
because we all know the script, right? If we all know the script, don't read the script again. Oh my God.
Well, how could you know what the Bible says without an infallible interpreter? Huh? Checkmate, Protestants. And we have one more.
Oh no! I should go to Rome.
Oh no! Please.
Move on.
Actually, nice comment here. The other Paul, not necessarily a question, but just wanted to thank you and other prop bros for helping me not cross the Tiber, and that means a lot. Thank you for mentioning that. Okay, I don't want to overly offend my Romanist friends, but I will offend if it means the truth. Thank you very much for not crossing the Tiber. I'm happy that I could help with that, as modest a role as I have. And Eldridge also asks, also a basic Anglican question: do Anglicans need to affirm faith alone as a Protestant denomination, as it's not in the 39 Articles explicitly?
Yes, because the 39 Articles very briefly mention salvation and then refer you to one of the first two homilies, and that's the homily on salvation, and it's set out explicitly in that homily. So since the article refers to it, now who actually needs to affirm it? Well, obviously any of us getting ordained need to affirm it, and when you're received into the Anglican Church of Australia, which is a peculiar little thing that we have, you do affirm the fundamental declarations, the 39 Articles, and BCP as our standard of faith and worship, and so you end up having to affirm that as well. So yeah, our doctrinal position is faith alone because we're a classically Protestant Reformed denomination.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. No two ways about it. Based faith alone. I love that stuff. And from one of my highest tier supporters, question about Anglican theology. David, do you hold to branch theory with the three branches being Anglican, Catholic, and Orthodox?
Look, I'm going to give one of those fudge answers. I recognize that's where we've gone. Are they legitimate branches? I think I want to say in good conscience, no. Clearly, I don't think that Rome has the gospel. I think they've erred greatly, and that's of course a position in the Articles, where the article says, let me dig it up for you. Hang on a minute. Here's the actual answer. So I've got my AAPB, which is my Anastasian 78.
I got that exact edition, but
a prayer book. Did you steal it from church?
Actually, no, from my college. I don't want to give away.
39 Articles. Let me just read it to you. And my brain is a bit fried now. So,
just a little more frying.
So Article 11, by the way, for that last one, we are accounted righteous before God only for the merit of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ by faith, and not for our own works or deservings. I mean, that's sola fide anyway. Wherefore, that we are justified by faith only, there it is in the article, is the most wholesome doctrine and very full of comfort, as more largely is expressed in the homily of justification. So off you go there to read all about that. Let me just find you this one about the other churches. Okay, in Article 19, the second paragraph reads, as the Church of Jerusalem, Alexandria, and Antioch have erred, so also the Church of Rome hath erred, not only in their living and manner of ceremonies, but also in matters of faith. So that's our official position. Paul, I want to welcome you to the one true church. It's great that you're with us. We are Orthodox and we are Catholic because we are according to the whole. Actually, I don't actually quite hold to that position, but you get ordained in a denomination because you're comfortable that it is a legitimate expression of Catholic Orthodox faith. That's what we think Anglicanism is. Yeah. So that's I will regularly use the language of Catholic, but I'm sure again that's a script that
I am gladly Catholic according to the whole of the invisible body of Christ.
That's right.
Let's go. And he's gonna ask as well, if so, what do you make of Catholics and Orthodox saying Anglicans are not in the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church of the Nicene Creed?
I say one, they're wrong. I say two, I don't need them to approve of me because unlike so much of my narcissistic culture around me, I don't need people's approval.
Based, very based. I like that. And from another supporter from E Cinque, a resident Italian man, for Father Ould. There you
I
go.
was just
Hello,
saying that to
Father
annoy me.
Ould.
That's okay.
How did he get involved in Anglican ministry? Was he raised Anglican or did he convert later, etc.? Great stream. Thank you,
That's a
Cinque.
great question. Thank you. So I grew up in a middle of the road Church of England church in the north of England. My parents were churchgoers. I sang in the choir. I had all the rough and everything. I had a nice little voice when I was a treble. And I first heard the gospel in that place, apart from hearing it in the liturgy and not recognizing it. First heard it when I was about 17 years old, and a new minister came to that church who was an evangelical. And so he gathered some of the teenagers that were floating around together and started a little youth thing on a Friday night in his home. And I heard the gospel then. I didn't respond to it. I went away to university, and I spent, and in the UK, you tend to leave home for university and go live on campus in another place. And I had a pretty typical first year as a student. I won't go into details, but you can imagine the sorts of things a young man who's 18 away from home for the first time got up to. And then in my second year, I was fortunate enough to go on exchange to the University of Illinois in the United States, and got a little scholarship to make that happen. And while I was there, I met some Christians in my residence hall, and I said, "Oh yeah, I'm a Christian," and they were wise enough to go, "Okay," and invite me along to a little Bible study group and along to church with them, and so on. And while it wasn't perfect by any means, an American church has its own idiosyncrasies, as I'm sure you'll know. I did hear the gospel, and I think possibly God in his providence and his mercy needed to take me outside of those structures that I was used to hear the gospel afresh. I was actually converted. I think in hindsight, I was actually converted by considering Paul's conversion. And it's interesting, Paul, I had never doubted this stuff was true historically. I just never put it together in my brain. And
you knew, but you didn't believe, you didn't really like trust full
yeah,
on.
that's right. So, and I kind of they were just stories, right? I knew, and I assumed Jesus was real, hadn't really thought about it, and all that kind of stuff. But no one had really sat me down and gone, here's what it means, right? Plus also in God's sovereignty, he hadn't decided to switch the light on yet either. Anyway, so it was considering the Apostle Paul that really did me, because I here's what literally went through my brain, and I'm a very cerebral person, as you might have told. It's not that I don't have
big brain indeed.
I don't say it's big. It's just active. You can be very active and not very big. But I went, okay, so what would cause this guy to change so radically? Not just to stop what he was doing, the persecution of the church, but actually to become its number one advocate. So you can imagine the Christians jumping him on the road to Damascus and going, "Listen, Paul, we know where your family lives. We've had enough." And that might stop him, but it wouldn't turn him around in the way that he clearly turned around. You can read his letters. I mean, the man is utterly obsessed and convinced. And so my brain kind of just went, okay, so he must have met the risen Lord Jesus on the road to Damascus. Therefore, Jesus must have risen from the dead. Game changer.
Based.
That was kind of just what happened. That was going on in my brain. At the same time, I can't give you, some people have a very clear conversion moment. I can't give you a conversion moment. I can tell you I left for my big adventure to go to America as a student, not converted, and I came back converted. I came back, and one of the things I did is I went to church with my mother. I remember these, remember these distinct moments. I went to church with my mother, and we went to the early communion service, and it was said, not sung. There wasn't even a choir to sing it. So we just said the liturgy, and it was effectively 1662 liturgy. And I just remember going, in hindsight, what was going on was for the first time, I was seeing that these words were everything that I wanted to say. And they now meant something to me. And these were words that I had sung and read for years sitting in the choir stalls and just gone through. And now all of a sudden, something was going on. Then I had my last year at university, my third year at university back in the Midlands. Some Christians in my residence hall dragged me along to a great little independent evangelical church nearby, where I heard the Bible taught well for the first time. I mean, no disrespect to my American friends, but now I was getting good systematic exposition of the scriptures. A guy called Bill James, who's quite a famous guy in the independent evangelical movement in England. And I got to tell you, Paul, I balked. I balked because for the first time the Bible was being applied into my life, and I was being told I had to change.
Wow.
And nobody likes that. And yet at the same time, I was intellectually utterly compelled, because I could not deny that what I was being shown in the Bible is what the Bible was saying. So I had this 3-4 week kind of just push and pull, and God, and again in his mercy, used who I am as an individual, used my brain to drag my heart along. And so I got hooked then on, I want to call it, good teaching of the Bible. Then I moved to London after I graduated, started training as a chartered accountant, and ended up at a church called All Souls Langham Place, which some of your viewers may have heard of. It's the home of the great John Stott and Richard Bewes. And I heard preaching for the first time. And again, when I say that, I don't mean disrespect to Bill James. He was a great preacher, but these guys got up in the pulpit and they preached. They exhorted me. It was something else, Paul. And as I'm training to become a chartered accountant, which, you know, it's okay, and I quite enjoyed it. I just remember seeing what was going on at church in the preaching of the word, and the effect it had on me, and the effect it had on those around me. And I just remember going, that's a game I want to be doing. Like that is what I think I have been shaped for and should be doing. And I just inexorably moved in that direction. Was it an accident? It was an Anglican church, maybe not. I mean, I was very fortunate that as I was thinking about full-time pastoral paid ministry, set aside for that the clergy around me were saying, if you're going to be an Anglican, you need to read the 39 articles, make sure you're happy with them, that in good conscience you can affirm them, because that's the denomination you'll get ordained in. If you can't, that's okay, but in good conscience, go maybe Presbyterian or even Baptist. So that's how it happened. That's how it happened. That's where I went, I think.
That's a fascinating story. Very, very fascinating story. Thank you for that question, Ichinkwe. That was excellent to hear. Very good testimony. Very inspiring, really. And another one now from another supporter. How can Orthodox, Catholics, and High Church Protestants fight against the spirit of the age infiltrating Christianity? It seems more and more people in liturgical churches are pro-abortion and homo.
Look, I just think, can I just say, let's be careful about the language of homo and the way that we use it. I realize
the internet's a bit of a flamey place.
Well, we can be a bit pugilistic.
Including my channel.
Can I encourage you to think about how we're describing things? I don't know who you are, so that's it. How can we do it? I think we just need to keep having courage. We need to keep being clear. We need to be encouraging our ministers to be brave and stand for things. And we actually need to be working out why we hold to the positions that we hold, and be able to defend them, I think, a bit more substantially. The Protestants, the Prots, are not as great at this as the other guys. The first ever demonstration I ever went to was a number of years ago, and it was the abortion demonstration, the one in Martin Place on that cold night. And it was fascinating to me that it was mainly the Orthodox and the various shades of Catholicism and all that kind of stuff that were out there, and not so many Protestants. As a result of that, we held an event at the cathedral to try and just agitate Protestant engagement in that. Same thing over the euthanasia debate as well. I think we need to just stand up and be counted. Just keep plugging away. There's no silver bullet, guys. Just keep plugging away. What is really good is to develop good relationships with as many politicians as you can.
That's a good idea. Yeah. And I can attest to that as well. In Sydney, I was like, well, most of my, probably as a result of this stuff, actually, most of my IRL friends, until I hit up St. John's, are all like trad Romanists. And a lot of that is because of like pro-life events and that, which are very much largely led to charge by Roman Catholics.
Super strong in that. And now I owe Bob an apology, because in the YouTube comment he said that the word homo just got cut off because of a character limit. So my apologies. Please forgive me,
Reverend.
I'm assuming you are my brother because you say Bob, but one doesn't want to assume these days.
Plot twist: this man who's commenting here is an Eastern Orthodox.
He's Eastern Orthodox.
Yes.
Good on him.
Eastern, and then like whisper Orthodox.
hath erred in matters of faith.
Yes, hath erred quite greatly indeed. And I think we can get some non-supporter questions as well. Now we've gone through quite a lot of those. Let me try to scroll through here. There's so much. Live chat is so crazy. I need to hire someone to just compile all questions in a live chat, so I don't have to manually scroll through.
Then you'll spend all your patron money, won't you?
I know, right? I know.
I'm the guy that has to check through
it. do the Anglo-Catholics affirm sola fide, or how many of them do?
Yeah, I think they do. Certainly the ones that I chat to.
You think they do?
Well, see, I would say they affirm it and then they undermine it with some of the positions that they take. That's probably how I'd express it. But I certainly want to imply that they don't affirm it. Certainly, those that I speak to are very clear on those issues. Yeah.
How does the Anglican Church stand on abortion?
Oh dear. So here in Sydney, we're very, very clear. Unfortunately, other dioceses have taken a position, and it tends to be pretty much well correlated to their position on biblical faithfulness anyway. Yeah, that's
true. This is I'm not sure if I fully understand this, but maybe you do. Is it possible for some or all Anglican formularies to finally have a confessional status in the new wave of Anglicanism?
Look, I would argue almost we do anyway, because as soon as you say this is what you must affirm, this is our constitutional position, you're kind of at that point anyway. The only thing to I think always be cautious about these confessions is they're documents of their time, right? So they deal specifically with the matters that were of most contention at that time. So, for example, the 39 Articles, and I don't think Augsburg or Westminster Confession either, has nothing to say about marriage. And why would they? Because nobody thought crazy stuff that they're thinking today. It's the same thing with the Nicene Creed, right? When people go, oh, but the Nicene Creed doesn't say this, I go, but why would it? Nobody was debating that in that day. Yeah. But I think it has a quasi-confessional status anyway, really, if you take seriously its place in our Constitution.
Yeah, that's
I like the word quasi. I've been longing to use that for a while.
Yes, quasi. I've
got to say it properly, Paul.
No, yeah, it's quasi.
Queen would say quasi, I'm sure.
It's quasi. That's how you pronounce it. That's the canonical pronunciation.
That's how you pronounce it, and then I'm right.
Okay. No, that's an old question. I think we had another one from. All right. Well, this is kind of already answered at the beginning, but I guess you could speed run it. As Anglicans, how do you respond to the common gotcha that you were born of the desires of an evil king, and therefore you are not part of the true church founded by Jesus?
Yeah, well, I think I kind of sort of covered that in the history lesson beforehand. Yeah. But I think what you want to do is you want to point to that that massive shift that kicks in when Edward becomes king. That's when they get these acts of uniformity. That's when you get the prayer books and two revisions of the original and then the revision in 1552. I think that's how you demonstrate that it's not there. And I think we just need to be able to be realistic about who Henry was and who he wasn't.
Yeah, that's it. I see another question from a supporter as well, but I think it was contextualized by a prior comment by Father Zeb. So Father Zeb said, it was sad that there was a push to remove the fundamental declarations even listed in our constitution. Yep. And then I think in response to that, supporter Josh, aka Elderidge, says, does this say something about the ordination or clergy who are actually outside of the Anglican faith?
It says a lot about it, Josh, doesn't it? It says a remarkable thing that bishops are approving and choosing to ordain clergy who, in one way or another, we've had a real stink in the Diocese of Perth recently, where two candidates, clearly their manner of keeping of their life at home has been contrary to what it should be, and even late attempts to kind of wriggle around it and sort it all out. But again, it comes down to the bishops. If the bishops won't hold the line, if they actually don't believe the truth and think it's important, then they're going to let all sorts of things slip in. It does also speak to, now I'll answer the question I wanted to be asked. It does also speak to the need that our seminaries, our Bible colleges do their job well. So actually, the Western Church was in part lost in the Bible colleges, and so you're forming clergy who are being taught all sorts of nonsense stuff, Yeah. So watch whatever denomination you're in, watch who's in charge in your Bible colleges, who they're appointing, what's on the curriculum, what's coming out there, because those are the guys who will get into the pulpit and teach people.
Yeah, that's it. It's an unfortunate situation from Bible colleges, but we at least have some half decent ones out there. Like, what? How do you rate more?
Very highly, very
Nice.
highly. They rated me with a 2-1, but I rate them very highly.
Very nice.
So it's a great place. Actually, I can tell a story just on how good Moore is.
Story time.
And how hard they push us as students. In my third year of 4 years, and we do 4 years at Moore Theological College, in my third year, I do remember towards the end of the year preparing for my exams, and it's late afternoon. I'm sitting at my desk doing my work, and my brother, I have a twin brother who also was ordained in the Church of England. And he did his training at Wycliffe College, which is at the University of Oxford. So no slouch, right? And not a shabby education at all. He did 3 years there, and he comes online. I think it's Skype chat at the time, and he's like, "Hey, how you doing?" I said, "I'm good. I'm just prepping for my New Testament exam, third year New Testament exam. I'm just prepping my Greek text and getting ready for it." And the Greek New Testament examination is 2 exams. The first is an exegetical examination where they basically give you a chunk of Greek text and they say you've got an hour, write an essay. And so the essay is the translation of it, dealing with the textual variants, and doing like a little commentary section on context and what's going on and meaning and all that kind of stuff, like classic sort of exegetical exam. You got a couple of those to do, and they will pick from a chunk of New Testament that you've prepared, right? Okay. And you have to do prep from that. And then the other exam is a doctrine exam, but I'm prepping for my exegetical exam, so it's Greek text. And I say to him, I'm just prepping my Greek text. And he's a couple of years ahead of me in the game, so he's already ordained and out. And I said, what was your Greek text that you had to prep for your third year New Testament exam at Oxford University to be a priest in the Church of England? And he goes, Romans 8. The whole of Romans 8. So pretty full-on preparation, University of Oxford doing their thing. He says to me, so what's your text? I go, Romans 5 to 8, and the equivalent amount of text in the Luke Acts corpus.
Bruh.
So that's how hard they were pushing us, and making us work hard. So you've probably got some of the most highly theologically trained clergy, dare I say, in the world. I remember sitting at, and I don't say this in a pretentious way, I remember sitting in a discussion group in Nairobi at GAFCON 2013, in a discussion group, and some of the members of the group were African bishops. And within half an hour, it's clear to me I'm the most highly theologically trained person in this group by a long shot. Now, you have to be careful then what you do with that, right? But there's a reason they insist upon 4 years here at Sydney. There's a reason they insist on the original languages. There's a reason they insist on doing philosophy and church history and all that sort of stuff. And then in 4th year, they might give you a bit of a choice in how to specialize and stuff.
Yeah, wow.
But so 4th year,
so is this like a bachelor or a master program? Or?
So interesting again, Bachelor of Divinity. Anywhere else, it would have been called a master's, but I think it's good for the soul to not call it that. Anywhere else it would be a master's, right? It's just crazy curriculum. 4th year I did Christology and Atonement as my 2 specialist choices, so I'm doing a whole semester on Christology, a whole semester on Atonement. My brother goes, I did a couple of weeks on Atonement in Doctrine in year 3.
That's pretty epic.
So and then you wonder why there are ministers there who just go off the rails.
Yeah,
they
honestly
don't have that depth of theological understanding and knowledge of the history of the debates and all that kind of stuff. So when someone comes along and says, "Oh, what about this?" they go, "Oh, that sounds good." Especially if in the first place you weren't solid on stuff.
Yeah, that's it. I'm definitely, after this or some other time, I definitely want to talk about more college, how that works, because I'm kind of interested in the future of my study myself.
We should get you one of the have a chat with that, and even get maybe one of the lecturers onto your body.
That'd be fun. That'd be really fun.
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
That'd be awesome. And here's an interesting one. In this theoretical situation where bishops become more rogue, would the clergy in GAFCON be required to commune active homosexuals because they're technically in the Australian Anglican Church?
Would the clergy be required to commune? Do you mean administer the sacrament to them, or do you mean just be in fellowship with them? If be in fellowship, then this will be a critical issue, right? This will actually be a critical issue. In one sense, we've met. I'm absolutely clear that some of the delegates at by their own admission at the General Synod were in exactly that position. So in one sense, we already have in one sense. There's a more general question about whether you withhold the Lord's Supper to anybody, and I think you do, don't you? If there's open and flagrant sin that's unresolved. But the prayer book as well has what Ryle calls the generous assumption, where it kind of assumes you're taking responsibility for yourself. So if I know of something that's utterly flagrant, then I have a difficult choice to make as the pastor. But
and he says, yes, I meant administer Holy Communion to them.
Well, look, I'm sure I have in the past, but I would want to be very careful if I knew something was going on. But not obviously not just that issue. There are other issues as well.
Yeah.
But
here's a fun comment. The DNA of Anglicanism is one of division, diversity, heterodoxy, and chaos. Not fixable. Leave for inner peace.
If that is someone from Rome making that argument, then all I want to say is the words pot, kettle, and black.
Yeah, I was thinking exactly that. And then he says, I wonder if he's going to say, actually, no, I'm Orthodox. And then even blacker.
One of my favorite church hymns is "The Church is One Foundation," and in one of the verses, by heresy rent asunder and distressed. The church is itself. Its story is one of division, diversity, heterodoxy, and chaos. The New Testament teaches us that there are false teachers, and they're there right at the start, causing division and strife. In one sense, any place that is absolutely pure and remains pure forever, I want to go, what's gone wrong? Because
the one place that is there, that's called the New Jerusalem.
Well, exactly, that's the new creation, right? When everyone will be Anglican.
That's it.
Yeah, you're just closer to eternity now. Than
former Anglican, now Lutheran.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Interesting. Right. How's the ECLA going for you guys? Anyway,
you have such a great variety of viewers here, and I appreciate the camaraderie across the divisions and the divides and the we call it banter, right? I do appreciate that. That suits me very, very well. It's good to be.
That's it. I'm all for the very, very soft banter type of ecumenism, because it works best because we don't pretend our differences are nothing or don't exist. We're very solid with it to the point where I'll even have many Orthodox friends who watch my channel who say, you're outside the church, your soul's in danger. And yet we're buddies, and we can talk about the stuff. We can have fun.
But that's consistency and integrity, isn't it?
That's it. Yeah, integrity.
That's right.
Maybe a couple more we have. All right, so I guess we have to make a new 40 articles.
What do you want to add, Jeremiah?
What should the 40th? I'm curious. What 40th article would you add? If you were the Pope of Anglicanism right now, what would you add?
Pope of Anglicanism. My 40th article would be "There is no Pope." What would my 40th article be? I think we would have an article on human sexuality, gender, marriage, all that kind of stuff. I think that would be required, wouldn't it? That would be in the same way that the articles respond directly to the crises of their day.
That's it. Yeah.
You'd have to ask that. It's interesting that the Jerusalem Declaration of 2008 has a specific section on human sexuality because it's the issue of the day.
That's it. That's
right.
And I'm not saying any more questions. Actually, I think there was one just up here. Oh dear, here we go. What do you think of female clergy?
I have lots of good friends who are female clergy. It seems to me that the bar on pastoral congregational leadership on women, or maybe put it the other way, the prescription that it ought to be men leading the household of God is pretty clear to me. But there are lots of wonderful, first of all, there are lots of wonderful deacons who have been ordained here in Sydney. Indeed, probably more women get ordained in Sydney every year than across the rest of the Anglican Church of Australia most years. So I was ordained as one of the group of 48, and there were 8 or 9 women as part of that crew being ordained as deacon. And I can think of right now some brilliant women doing great ministry, who themselves in good conscience don't want to be preaching to a mixed congregation or lead a parish, or some who kind of maybe wouldn't mind doing that, but also are happy to sit under and have many other opportunities to teach. And I've got a couple in mind I can think of. And you think I'm thinking of you, I probably am. I also know some women who have been ordained to the priesthood, as they would put it, and we're just going to be respectfully disagree with one another. There are some good, faithful gospel women out there who I think are mistaken, and yet in the mistakenness, they're carrying out their work faithfully, and I'm looking forward to seeing them in eternity when they realize they were wrong. And we'll have no feelings about it.
You get one of the lower floors in the
if
Great
you're
Mansion.
if you're watching from Canberra, you know who you are. I love you dearly as well. I'm very impressed with you. And there are others too who I've got a great deal of time for. And again, it goes back to what you said before, right? We can know that we disagree and not have to make that the fight. What was really interesting at General Synod is for the Orthodox, and use that statement in the broadest term, the Orthodox were quite prepared to set aside some of those disagreements for the sake of the gospel itself. Now, I acknowledge that actually I think because of the way that gender reflects the relationship between Christ and the church, there are some gospel issues at stake there. They're more extremely at stake with homosexual practice. So I don't want to pretend that's not the issue there. But I know some female clergy who, in good conscience, have been ordained to that position. I also know some who have been ordained to that position, and their reasoning is utterly ridiculous. But I find their reasoning on most things to be utterly ridiculous as well.
Because 1 Timothy wasn't written by Paul, it's pseudonymous.
There's all sorts of stuff. I mean, whenever anybody makes Galatians 3:27-28 the core of their you know that
I've got a short video on that.
Theological sophistication is not what's going on there.
It's not.
So that's my. If it sounds like I'm fudging it, maybe I am, but that's
so female deacons, yay. Female priests, nay. Female bishops, nay.
Absolutely not. Bishops, and it's a divisive move, isn't it? But,
I'm personally myself nay with all three, but you're my personal pope, so I must bow down to your decision making.
I'll take your homage in front of others in this way. It'd be a good conversation another time why you say no to deacons. I don't see a biblical warrant for that, but that's why we have these conversations.
Said contra. As the scholastics would say.
Yeah.
All right, we got a bunch more questions here. How much longer are you keen to go for?
I can, let's say 1 o'clock.
Oofed. Okay, 1 o'clock. Let's do that. Why not?
Yep.
Well, if the questions go to then.
What I'm going to do right now is I'm actually just going to check my calendar to make sure that we're okay with that. I'm on my double screen thing. Yeah. I'm going to say 1 o'clock with you, mate, if we get that far.
Yep, no problem. This is a good one. What is the official position of the Anglican Church on images of Christ and icons?
Going to get my trusty 39 articles out.
Hey.
The official position is no.
So iconoclastic.
Let me find you the exact article, because it's really, really good. Oh dear, friends, I'm really, really sorry. I should know these better, but basically, it's a vain and a fond thing. Look, I like a good icon. I appreciate its the art in it and what it's trying to do. I'm a big fan of Christian art and so on. But it depends how it's used. Let me put it that way. It's a vain thing to be gazed upon, which is said about the sacraments, but I think by extension to other things as well. I can't find the article right now. The official position is no. Smash them. Bit of that going on. Zeb's going to say they're all good. They can be used in personal piety. I get that. There it is again. Just waving it around doesn't make it right, there, Paul. I understand it.
Seventh Council, cringe, wrong. Nicaea 2, totally cringe, totally wrong. I'm an Anglicanist. The images are cool. I like them. They're good. They're useful. Venerating them, yeah, no, get that out of here. Second Commandment, gang.
I really like religious art. I'm a bit of a fan of it and a student of it. I think there's some great stuff. AWR's got it. Yeah, a no for worship. That's right. It's when it's like anything else. It can be abused, and it's the abuse of it that we're really quite concerned about.
Icons are good and right. Haha.
That's right.
Nah, sorry. Nicaea 2 is wrong and cringe. I've got future content coming. It's going to be a long time prep, but basically a systematic critique of Nicaea 2 and what's his name? John of Damascus, their reasoning on images. Because I think, in my opinion, that's one of the more clear issues where the so-called Orthodox and Roman Catholic Church just straight up changed from the earliest opinions. But that's going to be another fun issue entirely.
Yeah.
And yeah. And hello. What is David's favorite work on atonement theology, and why is it on the Incarnation by Athanasius?
I think you might be right. I'm going to be cheeky and actually say the Letter to the Hebrews. The
Bible, let's go. The Bible's my favorite atonement work.
Athanasius is great, isn't he? I just love that whole. The image of God is broken, so Christ comes as the image, and on all that sort of stuff, and just that asking of that question. It's Athanasius, isn't it? He goes, why couldn't the Son come as a donkey? So his whole thing on what is not assumed is not redeemed, all that kind of stuff, just absolutely brilliant. To get hold of. It's interesting, when we were doing atonement at Moore College, we read a whole bunch of stuff across the centuries. But Athanasius, I think, kind of stands out. I do, I don't think it needs to be said on a channel like this, but I do think anything anti-Nicene that you can read is always just brilliant to read. Moving beyond atonement stuff, if anyone ever says to me they want to get into some reading, I just go and read all that free stuff that's available online. I think New Advent's got the most readable kind of format to read, unless the other ones you can suggest. And go even earlier.
New Advent.
But Bob, I'm with you. I think it is on the Incarnation.
Yeah, there you go. Actually, really, really fun fact. Another digression from New Advent. So New Advent's run by Romanist guys. All these, there's other Roman Catholic writings and that in there. Otherwise, very useful resource. But one part of it, do you know the famous section from Irenaeus against heresies? Like, it's necessary everyone obey everyone agree with the city of Rome and all that.
Yeah.
And there's a bit at the end, all right? There's a bit at the end in the actual text where he says, insofar as all the faithful in the world agree and all that, basically predicating.
Because it's going for unity. So why would you break with Rome? Because we all agree, right? That's basically his argument, right?
Basically predicating the necessity of agreement with Rome, with Rome's agreement with everyone around the world, because everyone around the world goes to Rome, like, because everyone goes there and all that. But the additional New Advent cuts that last sentence out.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh,
sneaky,
yeah,
sneaky,
it does.
Sneaky.
It is. It is a big moment right there.
Oh, those Romans.
Very big. Those classic papists and their tomfoolery. Oh man, but yeah, that's a very funny one. Another comment. Also, denying people the Eucharist is an issue, because where do we draw the line with sin and who can and cannot be admitted? That's the money question, honestly.
Yeah, Zeb, and I think it comes down to blatant unrepentance.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it comes. That's what it comes down to. But my gut is, of course, that if you're doing church discipline properly, then Matthew 18, 1 Corinthians 5 have kind of kicked in before then anyway, because you've got a matter of open sin, and you're saying to someone this needs to be addressed, and you can't return to the fellowship until that moment. So Yeah, and that's actually dealt with clearly in the scriptures, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'd want to be thinking we'd be dealing with that, doing that for.
Yeah. Hey, Steve Christie, good to see you. Is there a liturgical book in Anglicanism that commands reading from the Apocrypha? Trent Horn brought it up in his debate against Jonathan Sheffield. Thanks.
So this one flies around. I think James Gadd was one I was chatting to about this.
Shout out, Father James. You had a chat with him in my comments. A friendly chat.
That's right. So and we talked about this. So look, the apocryphal books are included in some of the lectionaries. And the position, and this one I can read to you. It's Article 6, which is the really important one on the scriptures. So just listen very, very carefully. Where it goes. Holy Scripture containeth all things necessary to salvation, so that whatsoever is not read therein, nor may be proved thereby, is not to be required of any man, that it should be believed as an article of the faith, or be thought requisite or necessary to salvation. In the name of the Holy Scripture do we understand these canonical books of the Old and New Testament, of whose authority was never any doubt in the Church. And then they list what we understand to be the standard canon of the Old and the New Testament. And then it says this, and the other books, as Jerome saith, the Church doth read for example of life and instruction of manners, but yet doth it not apply them to establish any doctrine, which are the following. Then it gives you the classic list of the apocryphal texts. So that's our position. Now, the more Protestant you are within Anglicanism, which sounds like a bit of a tautology, frankly, but the more Protestant you are, the less you're even likely to dip into the Apocrypha. So let me say to my Protestant brethren, go read yourself a bit of Apocrypha. It's fun and funky and the rest of it. But the insistence upon reading it, you simply don't find in the articles. In fact, it seems to be very clear that they are not the canonical scriptures, but they are useful. And of course, just remember the context in which that is being written. It's been written at a time in the middle of the 16th century where Rome at Trent has for the first time canonized the Apocrypha.
Collapse the distinction between Deuterocanon and Protocanon. That's the key distinction that many even up to Anglo-Catholics who are like super yay Deuterocanon, but Romanist apologists, Orthodox apologists as well, saying that everyone believed the Deuterocanon. It's like, well, for one, not really, but second, those who did in the ancient times at least most often considered them in a second category, with certain exceptions. Some would would like say Baruch and all that, for example. Some would include that. Some would reject Esther. But even then, apart from that, there's general understood sets, and there was a deuterocanonical set which couldn't establish, as the article beautifully puts it, did not establish doctrine. And sorry, Romanists appealing to Maccabees for purgatory. Sorry, can't do that.
And Paul, there's a Vincentian canon argument, right, being used by Protestants in the 16th century. It wasn't believed by all the people all the time. So why would you insist upon it now? The answer, of course, is to buttress some unscriptural doctrines and dogmas. Dare we say it? And even then, with a pretty tendentious reading of some of those texts, anyway. And that's the best you can do. But
Father Zeb just has to say that's why we pray for the dead, David. Maccabees, for instance.
But we don't. It's interesting. The 1549 does, and Calvin and Bucer go, hey, Thomas Cranmer, really? And Thomas goes, oh yeah, I missed that one. And so now we give thanks for them.
And then the 1552, was it?
1552,
and the real divinely inspired version,
and the 1662, which of course is our standard of doctrine and worship. We don't pray for the dead. Based. As in on their behalf.
We do.
Yeah, well, maybe that's a debate for another day.
Although something I find interesting with that article is just like where it says we received these books that were like never in question without the church, and it talks about New Testament and Old Testament canon. But I think, there was the Anti-Legomena, there was the Second Peters and the Third John.
So clearly in the first couple of centuries, you've got this debate, right, going on about quite what is canonical, but by the time even you got to the Mauritanian canon, you've got pretty much consensus. I love that really old website. Does it still exist? ntcanon.org. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really
good old, hand coded in HTML. It's got really good examples of what it's got all the ancient fathers and a bunch of the heretics, and what they treat as canonical, what's not sure, what they don't
with original language text.
Really, ntcanon.org. Really.
And actually, really quickly, this one book that I plug every chance I get. I don't know if you've heard of it. Whoops, I don't know if you heard of it, Rev. Right here, the Biblical Canon List from Early Christianity, Text and Analysis by
I don't know that one.
Gallagher and John Mead. This is, in my opinion, one of, if not the best book you can get on the topic, because it systematically provides every canon list from the, well, it includes Sirach as well, because Ben Sirach mentions like the law, the prophets, and the other writings, all the way up to the early 5th century with English translations and original texts and commentary and introductions. So it is quite literally the best resource you can get on the topic.
So, of course, we're overstating it if we say there was uniformity on this from the very, very beginning. But the early church arrives at their position pretty solidly, long before Dan Brown thinks they did anyway.
That's it. Before, well, to be fair, Constantine did found the Roman Catholic Church, so we can affirm that the Roman Church. Oh, the other Paul. How is my favorite Christian bloke? I'm
very well, thank you very much.
That's it. Hang on, he was talking to me. I'm his favorite Christian bloke, not you. And it is a fine, just hit the afternoon now in Australia. It is very nice. And I am going to the pub with one of my friends after his work. So it's going to be a very nice time indeed.
Oh, it's nice and bright. A bit of blue sky out there.
It is quite bright indeed. It's pretty cloudy where I am, but otherwise it is pretty bright as well. And here's an interesting comment. This is true. Fun fact, there is no canon of scripture in the Orthodox Church to this day, at least not a de jure canon, though there is a de facto one.
I did not know that. That is fascinating.
That is actually true. Like one of my Orthodox friends, an Orthodox content maker, good friend, Craig Trillier, Orthodox Christian Theology, he's made this point quite a bit and references all sorts of patristic texts from the ancient period, but also all the way up into the medieval and even modern period from Orthodox theologians who will say, this is the canon, that's the canon. Some of them just straight up saying 66 books and that's it. And so there really actually isn't a formal official agreement on the canon in Orthodoxy, which is really fascinating. I think poses some problems, but they don't think it does. So
fascinating.
Very fascinating. And I think that's about it for now. I don't see, actually, no, here is one more. What is your favorite Roman Catholic theologian, your favorite Orthodox theologian, and your favorite Reformed/Anglican theologian?
Wow, that's a really good question, or maybe a trick one designed to expose me. I cannot claim to have a favorite Orthodox theologian, or at least even to have read in that area. So I'm going to give you a hard pass on that. Roman Catholic theologian. I'm going to name two for different reasons. One was a guy that I read. And I'm not going to say Augustine because he's Protestant.
Yes, he is.
One was a guy that I read when I was preparing my project in my 4th year at university, and he had written a detailed doctoral thesis on 1 Peter 3, and it was, I can't remember his name. It may have been Ellis. I'm not sure. And I can still remember to this day being really impressed with the thoroughness of his exegesis and the way he laid some stuff out. And it was really, I really enjoyed it. I cannot remember his name. Can I say, and I'm going to give you I'm going to say a name now, which is a bit of a swear word, and then I'll explain myself. My other favorite one is Hans Kung, right?
Okay.
Who is Hans Kung, who, and the reason I say that is because I read his On Being a Christian. And I read his 7 or 8 pages on the resurrection in On Being a Christian, where he effectively denies the physical bodily resurrection of Jesus without explicitly denying it. And that was probably the moment when I realized how perniciously dangerous and vacuous that liberal theology was. So I have a Roman Catholic, although he technically, obviously, by the standards of the Roman Catholic catechism, not a Roman Catholic, but I have a Roman Catholic,
like technically a Roman Catholic, officially.
To thank for that. Favorite Reformed Anglican theologian? Well, look, actually, I'll be a bit cheeky and say Cranmer. Really, really big fan of Cranmer. I do like a little bit of Bishop Jewell as well. His apology, I think, is really, really good. If you want to read the debates that are going on in England in the 16th century in particular, you'll see some really great theological working out of stuff. You can't go past J.C. Ryle, of course, 19th century, great guy. And modern Anglican theologians, the late Mike Ovey, who was principal at Oak Hill College in London, was a magnificent theologian, and he was taken away very suddenly. I think it was a heart attack a number of years ago. He was great. John Stott obviously has left a profound legacy. I don't think I agree with him on everything, but a profound legacy in the 20th century. So a bunch of good people you can read of various engagements in academia. Yeah.
Excellent. And there's one more. Who's your favorite Lutheran theologian?
Luther. I did read some Lutherans especially in my third year, I think, when I was looking at I did an essay on the return of Christ and whether it will be physical and bodily. And I remember reading not Maltman, but some other guys as well. Gosh, it has been a while.
Maltman. Oh, dude, that brings.
Well, Maltman was really interesting, right? And there's some other guys as well. If I had time, I'd be getting out my bibliography for that. Pannenberg was really, really engaging. Like, he really was engaging. But I was looking at a particular subset, and they were looking at the history and the historicity of certain events and future events, and they were engaging with Schweitzer's the non-return of Jesus, as though Jesus puts his hand on the wheel of history and gets pulled under it, so he doesn't come back, or does he come back? And these guys are engaging with this historicity stuff. So I was reading them within that particular subject area in order to present this essay, which I eventually ended up presenting with lines from Wesley's "Lo, he comes with clouds descending" as my paragraph and section headings, just to have, because once you've worked out what you're doing, you can have a bit of fun with it. So Christ does return physically and bodily, by the way, bearing the marks of his crucifixion. That's actually very, very important. That is very based, very, very true. Yeah. And the Lutherans 20th century Lutherans were engaging with those kinds of issues. It was fascinating, some fascinating stuff. Yeah. Pannenberg, really gripped me. Yes, there was something I was going to mention, but I can't believe it just drifted. It was important too. Darn, that sucks. Maybe it'll come back just before the last few minutes come out. Yes, we're almost there. Just before the last few minutes run away, maybe it will come back to me. Maybe it will just zap right back into my head. I don't know. Who is this? Was it Jungel or Jensen? Maybe. Well, that's Jensen. I read Jenson, S-O-N, but it was Pannenberg. Yeah. Okay. David, there was an excellent book titled "For the Life of the World" by Father Alexander. That's it. Before we get to this, I was going to mention with Maltman, he became a bit of a meme in my in some of my classes in Bible college. I actually went to Alpha Crucis for a bit. Fun fact. And in our Christology class, I ended up inventing something called the Maltman scale, because we just kept reading thing after thing by him and just thinking like, bro, you're wrong, Maltman, you're just wrong. And so I invented the Maltman scale, where 0 means basically the Bible, and 100 means absolutely heretical in every word. So that's what I invented with the Maltman. But here's the thing, Paul. And this is what I appreciated so much about more theological college, and which I don't see at the liberal seminaries, is they made us read these guys, and they went, you have to engage with the best of their argument. I mean, particularly at Moore College, we had a lecturer, an infamous lecturer, Robert Doyle, Dr. Robert Doyle, who was a bit famous. And his teaching method was to argue some of these guys, argue their case quite strongly, to get you to grapple with it and to agree with it. Because what you've got to do with guys like Maltman is go, what is the truth that I agree with him here, that he's trying to protect? What is the issue that's at stake here? What is he grappling with in good conscience? He's trying to make sense of, and that makes you a more sympathetic reader, so that you can understand. And then when you argue against him, you're arguing in a much better way, because you're actually engaging with the very best that he's got to say, rather than just going, well, he's wrong, isn't he? Which doesn't persuade anybody, right? But to actually engage with the best of his argument, which to engage with the best of his arguments. So I'm really grateful for being made to read those guys and to engage with them. Very grateful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And last comment before we finish up, David, there's an excellent book titled For the Life of the World by Alexander Schmemann, if you want to engage with more modern Orthodox theology, which is really well written.
Schmemann, that's a great name.
I don't know if it's Schmemann or Schmemann or...
Schmemann, no, that's I'm half Austrian. Schmemann, yeah.
Oh, there you go, half Austrian. And then TH says, Chemnitz, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation. I've heard good things about Chemnitz as well. I do want to get his 4-volume set, Examination on the Council of Trent. But yeah, that's pretty much that. Rev, this was actually epic. This was super epic.
We went long, didn't we? That was pretty...
I know, we did. And there's still so much we could say and do. But before we shut down the stream now, plug yourself. Plug everything you need.
DavidOuld.net, OULD.net. Come to the blog and see what we're doing. Also, maybe follow the Facebook page at St. John's Cathedral in Parramatta, and you can see the sort of stuff that we do. We do a regular thing called Cathedral Conversations, where we engage in different issues and try to put the cathedral in some way in the middle of public conversation. And so that would be good as well. The next one we're having is on asking the question of whether Christians should be involved in politics in the wake of the recent federal election here in Australia. That's happening next Thursday night. You can find more information out there as well. But watch the blog. I blog in sporadically in bursts. I write a bit of theology. I write a bit about the Anglican Church. And all that kind of stuff. Love and value engagement with those that I disagree with.
Are you active with the YouTube channel or not really?
Not particularly. I did a season of a podcast called Dual Citizens, which I've been active, and we're going to start the second season in a while. Cool. Just carving out the space for that, and that is really saying we're dual citizens. We're citizens of this earth, citizens of heaven. It's a bit of a play on my own dual citizenship, and trying to do a current affairs sort of engagement thing there. So just trying to carve out the space for that again. That's a lot of thought that has to go into that. So, you need to make sure you got the energy and the space for it. So a bit of a sporadic blurter of things, and more than happy for people to read and engage. Pretty epic.
So there you go, people. You can definitely find his site right here. And Rev, thank you so much for coming on. This was
thank you for having me.
Enlightening, and it was very, very fun. God willing, if any other relevant topics come up in the future, we can keep at this. We can go again. This will be absolutely. This is just excellent engagement all around. And likewise to other people here, thank you, Matt, for posting the link tree to all my relevant social media and pages and support pages and all that stuff. You can go there and find me everywhere. I particularly recommend my Gab and Odyssey as well, should the powers that be decide to nuke me from the main platforms for Christian speech. But and also likewise for the subscribe star, both in that link tree and in the link below. Thank you all so much for coming on. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Father Professor David.
Just Reverend. But thanks, Bob. At least that didn't get shortened off by the character limit.
True. No, it didn't.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, David. Good night. God bless. Thank you all so much for coming on. Thank you, Reverend. This has been Reverend David Ould. This has been the other Paul. I hope every one of you have a lovely day and evening. God bless.